I do believe we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Break the Rules live stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov at LevPo on Twitter, and we are here back with Dr. Jason Reza Jorjani, Uberboyo coming in powerful as always, and we are here to talk about the colossal statue of Prometheus, the project that Dr. Jason Reza Jorjani is making right now on top of Alcatraz. And from here, I am just going to let Jason start, but everyone, as always, be sure to like, subscribe, smash the bell, and all that good stuff. Anyway, Dr. Jason Reza Jorjani, you got the floor. Tell us about this project, and we'll just go from there.
Well, first of all, hello to you over there, Uberboyo. It's great to be back with you again, Steph. Thank you for joining us.
How are you doing, sir?
Thank you, as always, for hosting us, Lev.
It's a great pleasure, as always.
So, American Colossus. There's a link in the description to the website, americancolossus.org. American Colossus is a 501c3 nonprofit organization with the aim of building a colossal statue of Prometheus, taller than the Statue of Liberty, on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay. And just to give you an overview of how this project materialized, I had come out with a piece on, I believe it was February 7th, called American Prometheus. And it was originally published on my blog, and then it was republished by Arctos in the Arctos Journal. And if you go onto the American Colossus website, there's actually a section that has articles where we're going to be posting pieces on a fairly regular basis on a Substack that's associated with American Colossus. There's an American Colossus Substack, and the titles of the articles that get run there will also be linked on the website. One of those is this piece, American Prometheus, which I released on February 7th. And after I came out with that, Ross W. Calvin reached out to me. And Ross Calvin is a businessman. He's a trained economist, actually a very brilliant economist, who has some radical, innovative ideas, in particular for reestablishing American economic dominance vis-a-vis China by leveraging the capacity of crypto and blockchain technology, and also through a restructuring, let's say, of the global energy and minerals market. And Ross, though, also has been a follower of my work for some years. And you can see from his own writings on the American Colossus Substack, actually on a Substack that he has, which has the title Fire, Transcendence, and Profit, that you can see linked on the website as well. It's evident from Ross's own writings that he's been engaged with my ideas for years, and that he has a deep understanding of the archetype of Prometheus and why it's so relevant and necessary for catalyzing a renaissance of our civilization, of our country, America, but also of America as the core of the West. So Ross reached out to me after I came out with this piece, American Prometheus. And basically, if you look at the piece, it's identifying two convergent threats that are imminent. One is the danger of a second American Civil War, and the other is the prospect of a third World War. And basically, in this relatively short piece, I commit Prometheism to the defense of America in the context of both of these convergent struggles. And we can get into each of those. I'm sure we will get into each of those in the course of this conversation. But it seems that prompted Ross, after having followed my work for some time, to reach out and to propose that we collaborate on this project to build this Colossus. And, Ross couldn't have known that, other than, obviously materializing or manifesting the symbol of Prometheus, this project had a very special significance to me and resonated in ways that I think he couldn't have imagined. I spent a lot of time in San Francisco as a child. It was probably the single place that we visited most during my vacations from school throughout the years during my childhood. And in particular, I had this morbid obsession with Alcatraz. And I actually insisted on visiting Alcatraz every time that I stayed in San Francisco. So Alcatraz, to me, seemed to be exactly the right place to build this monument.
Because it's a prison like Prometheus was imprisoned? Would that be...
Well, yeah. I mean, that's to be very, there are a lot of layers of meaning in that. And if you want to look at my take on it, there's a piece called The Titan of the Rock that's also linked on the American Colossus website. And in this piece, I discuss how Alcatraz evokes Greek mythology in more than one way. It not only does it refer in some way to the rock that Prometheus was chained to. They call Alcatraz the Rock in American, basically the nickname of Alcatraz is the Rock. And so it evokes the rock and the Caucasus that Prometheus was chained to, his place of imprisonment, but also his place of liberation. And obviously when we built the statue, it's not going to be Prometheus chained, it's going to be Prometheus unbound. So it's Prometheus unbound in the place where he had been imprisoned. But then Alcatraz, as I discuss in this piece, Titan of the Rock, Alcatraz also evokes Tartarus because, the Greeks had this conception of a rocky underworld, even beneath Hades, where the Titans had been bound by the Olympians, the Titans who fought against the Olympians in the Titanomachia and the Clash of the Titans against the gods. They were imprisoned in this rocky underworld. And Alcatraz is kind of a place for condemned souls. I mean, the island is purported to be haunted. There are numerous ghost stories about Alcatraz. And these include, for example, sightings of a spectral beam of light from the first lighthouse that had been built on that island. In fact, the first lighthouse that had been built on the west coast of America was built on Alcatraz Island. And even before European settlers arrived, Alcatraz seems to have been used by the Native Americans of that area as basically a place of banishment for rebel Indians. So it kind of was the Overlook Hotel, of prisons even before the Europeans arrived. And so in that way, it connects to the myth of Tartarus and the fact that, one of the brothers of Prometheus, Menoetius, whose name means doomed might, he was imprisoned in Tartarus after the clash of the gods and titans. So there's multiple ways in which this connects. And then, of course, demolishing Alcatraz prison and turning it into the base for this monument is also symbolic of the way in which we hope to transform the atmosphere of San Francisco, which is, after all, the gateway to Silicon Valley, the great beacon of innovation and, industrious creativity in the United States. It now has this increasingly dilapidated and devastated city at its core, right? And that needs to be changed. That needs to be expeditiously changed if we have any hope of continuing to rival China in terms of, and then ultimately surpass China and leave them in the dust in terms of technological innovation. So that's these are among the many reasons why I think the locale is perfect. Some people, when we came out with this idea, said, well, you should build it on Angel Island, which is a vacant island between Alcatraz and San Francisco. But no, the symbolism of Alcatraz is very precisely relevant to the myth of Prometheus and also to what we want to say about catalyzing an American Renaissance and a rebirth of the city of San Francisco.
Well, now I want to hear what Steph thinks of all this. I don't know if this is the first time you know of this really ambitious project, but one thing I'm curious about from Steph is whether he could see a similarity going on in Ireland when it comes to this rebellion that's currently going on versus what the politicians are trying to do, if you can compare that to what's going on in America. Also, there is a really nice comment I wanted to read here from Michael Johnson. It's not a super chat, but it's very worthy of talking about how all the people in San Francisco should get replaced by statues.
Yes, but Mike Johnson, he may be an agent of mine, so I do know that man, and yeah, I disavow everything he says. Actually, no, wait, no, I avow everything he says. I switch. I'm like everything he says. He's basically my spokesperson here. So if he starts saying anything crazy, just like yeah, I signed it off. It's all good. There's a lot of things there. There's a lot of things that Jason brought up. There's a huge amount to go into for a variety of different reasons, and I'm not sure exactly where you want to push this, but I've been aware of this project for a long time. I'm not sure if I've been aware of it before Jason, and this is not some flex, I'm the original hipster type thing, but I was speaking to Ross like well over a year ago, and he told me about this, and so we've spoke about this, or well over a year, around about a year ago, and we've got into this, and he was explaining it to me, and I was like, oh yeah, Jason would love this. There's a guy I know called Jason who would love this, and he was like, oh yeah, I know Jason. So he had the idea in his mind for clearly, and it's amazing to see it get pushed forward. I think the main thing that I'm thinking about, first of all, is the obvious choice of the symbol of Prometheus is fascinating in the context of where the culture is right now, because we're starting to go through finally a point where there is a reaction coming to, shall we say, the domination of the woke, and people are now starting to push back. And of course, Jason brought up a civil war, so perhaps this is something interesting to get into first of all. Now, this is obviously coming up with the force of the trad reaction, which is a very understandable one. Like, I'm extremely sympathetic to it. And I would always say stuff like the purpose of things, for example, traditionalism, is that it does bring people back to health, a huge, egregious thing that the woke have done, if we will. Or maybe you could even say the sin of the progressive attitude within the West is that even since the Enlightenment, we've had this sort of hapdash attitude towards the function of religious thinking and how it leads to things like fertility and health. So disrespectful of that we've actually found ourselves in an ironic state where we're almost entirely sterile. And all that's left at this point is people are like, I don't want to live a life that's sterile. I don't want to live a life that's not having children. I don't want to live a life where I'm broke. I'm subject to debt slavery. I don't want to live this type of way. And so people are sort of developing this feverish attitude where they're literally like ready to fight in order to break out of this. What if all history, for example, would talk about this quite a lot? Is there going to be a coming American Civil War? And Jordan Peterson, for example, in some sense sets the ideological stage for what that reaction might look in its simplest and most mainstream version, which is a quasi-religious liberalism that is Republican and going against the sort of woke hierarchy, if you so will. Now, what's interesting is that at the same time as that happening, you even have other movements like e-acceleration, for example. So these are like tech guys who are looking at all the same problems that the trads are looking at. They're saying like, all right, the fertility rate is bunkus. People aren't producing anymore. There's a large amount of immigration coming in order to replace the fact that the population is not fertile anymore. There's quite a lot of problems with money. I don't think anybody's unaware of the fact that debt is absolutely ridiculous at this point. We're basically in like a sort of usury, hilarious joke that was as bad as the end of the Roman Empire. All of these trends lead towards a significantly brutal crash. The e-acceleration idea, like the trad guys are like, we default back to religious traditionalism to ground this, because this all has to come down. And the thing that's going to catch you is that you're on Noah's Ark, which is the tradition, in order to do that. And like, bro, I get it. I think a lot of people at this point get that. The e-acceleration guys have a different attitude. They're like progressivism to the end. And they're like, we are going to go through this. We're going to literally try create technologies that break us past these problems. So for example, Bitcoin is a brilliant example. Like, how do you deal with the debt spiral, which its end game can only be war? Bitcoin actually allows us to offshoot out of the failing financial system into an abundant one. Artificial intelligence generates through automation an abundance that was not previously possible, that allows us to escape the debt cycle. Technology allows us to escape our problems. And this is a counter progressivism. This is not like the woke stuff. This is a progressivism via tech, a tech progressivism. Now, I think Jason is in some sense like the man of literature that was predicating this with the symbol of Prometheus, because that's exactly what I'd imagine Prometheus would present, is this sort of idea that if you take like audacious risks, you might actually be able to escape the paradigm you're in. So we're trapped in a paradigm. and death spiral, fertility crisis. The only way that can go, based on history, is brutal violence and a reversion back to something that is more grounded in tradition. I guess the Promethean creative possibility is that we break the paradigm, shift paradigms, paradigm perspective shift, and we go into something new. And I think people like Elon Musk would be very much in this perspective as well, you know, and it's very interesting to even notice him. He has turned against the quote unquote woke. And he said this all DEI and all this diversity hire stuff. This is bad because this is going to seep into my companies. The government is going to impose restrictions upon me. And I'm going to be forced to participate in this essentially communism that's going to stop my ability to reach Mars. I'm not going to reach Mars if I'm not allowed to hire people based on competence. That's just not going to happen. And so he goes and he has this rebellion and buys Twitter and all this type of stuff. Now, Musk's spirit is very interesting because he's now flirting a little bit with the traditionalist reactionaries. But of course, like, I think he's obviously an accelerationist on some level. Like, he's shooting forward and he's like, you know, the world is falling apart, but he's like, we'll also be on Mars. The world is falling apart, but we'll also have electric cars. The world is falling apart, we'll have like space rockets. So he reaches forward. He believes in solutions. And I think that's important to cultivate. So this dichotomy I see as maybe the woke thing kind of implodes. It's lost so much moral power. It's left us now with an interesting question: what comes after it? And it seems like there's an aspect of it that's progressive acceleration. You could even say slightly right-wing coded, although I don't think that's the correct way to phrase it. But you know, it's a different type of progressivism that's like Promethean progressivism, perhaps. And then you have traditional impetus forcing in. That's very powerful too, like extremely powerful, no joke. And I wonder where we're at right now. Are these two forces duking it out for who gets to lead the reaction? Is the civil war going to be between that? Will it be like World War I? Will there be a civil war between the left and the right? And then there'll be another war afterwards where the right wins, and it'll be a civil war between the progressivists and the traditionalists. These things are very interesting to contemplate. So it's nothing to do with the statue in a way, but maybe everything to do with the statue.
I think it has everything to do with the statue. In fact, I mean, that couldn't be more on point. And I'm actually not going to unpack that. Let people, you know, he who has ears, let him hear. The only phrase that I'm known to quote from the Gospels from time to time.
Would you say, Jason, by the way, that there is a difference between effective accelerationism and Prometheanism?
Yeah, so I wanted to get into this in response to what Steph was saying. Look, you could see what we're doing as a kind of third way after the initial battle with wokeism has been fought and won, right? So you're absolutely right, Steph. So first, we're going to have this sort of united front of the right against wokeism, against SJWs, or what you might call cultural Marxism. There's a piece that I've written that's going to be coming out on the American Colossus Substack. It's going to be linked on the website. That's specifically a piece critiquing cultural Marxism. So yes, that's the first battle. But then there is this polarity within the right. It's an extremely tense dialectical polarity between traditionalism on the one hand and accelerationism on the other. And I see my project of Prometheism from the beginning as having represented a third way, namely a kind of archaeofuturism, where I reject, on the one hand, any regressive return to tradition, either in the form of the Christian heritage or what I think actually shares the same essential form with it, the same form or essence with it, namely Olympian traditionalism, namely a kind of Apollonian, hierarchical, paternalistic paganism.
Right? Like Hinduism, for instance, that would be.
Or Hinduism, for example, because the Olympian pantheon and the devas are functionally the same thing. Actually, genealogically, they're also the same, because we're looking at two different offshoots of the same Indo-European community, right? And Prometheus is a figure who stands in rebellion against that pantheon. So Prometheus is a rebel against tradition, but Prometheus, I think, also is arguably the fountainhead of all of those characteristics that make the West unique as a civilization. Western civilization had its birth precisely in the century and in the cultural milieu where Aeschylus made Prometheus the first face of Greek drama and the father of philosophy. Both there couldn't be figures further apart than Martin Heidegger and Karl Marx, right, in the history of the modern Western intellectual tradition. But both Marx and Heidegger agreed that Prometheus is the father of philosophy, that he was sort of the patron, of the whole philosophical tradition that began in Greece. So what it is that makes Western civilization unique, this, forethought, this visionary futurism, innovation, creativity, strategic thinking, right? And ultimately also a kind of will to heroic self-sacrifice. All of these qualities are embodied by the Prometheus archetype. And so in a sense, Prometheus is an archaic heritage. Prometheus is, in a way, the bedrock of a certain tradition, but it's a progressive tradition or a futurist tradition. And in that sense, embracing this archaic symbol, this archetypal basis for the progress of the West is also a rejection of a rootless, nihilistic form of accelerationism, where when you look at a lot of these thinkers of accelerationism, they, like, for example, Nick Land, to the extent that, recently I've become somewhat more aware of his work, they completely reject any tradition or any, cultural world whatsoever. And they seem to be advocating for the subsumption of humanity into some kind of a definitively post-human artificial intelligence. Effectively, the vision of the future that you get from them is the Borg hive mind.
With polycules in it as well.
What was that again?
Polycules, like the whole polyamory thing. That seems to be also something that's found within a lot of like ultra-rationalist communities that don't really seem to seek for something higher than whatever it is they're already used to.
Yeah, well, they have a vision of transforming humanity into a termite colony or a beehive. And that's something that I categorically reject. And it's also something which I think is going to be extremely destructive insofar as if that's the form of accelerationism that's allowed to move forward, it is going to some extent, justifiably catalyze a very severe reaction from the traditionalist right. I mean, after all, people are interested in preserving humanity in some way, shape, or form, right? And I think Prometheusm represents a third way. And I think that we want this sculpture, this Colossus in San Francisco, to embody that archaeo-futurist alternative. After all, the sculpture is going to have a classical form that reaches back to, the greatness of Western civilization from its fountainhead in Greece and Rome. But the sculpture is also a monument to the god of technological science, right? And of innovation and futurism. So there is a third way. And, insofar as we're able to ultimately defeat wokeism, I think that third way is the key to resolving the inevitable conflict that Steph pointed to, which will take place between two opposing polarities of the right, in the relatively near future.
Steph, how do you think those two polarities are going to fare? Which one do you see as being on top? The Christians, the traditionalists, or the accelerationists?
Oh, bro, like, you don't...
If you're a betting man, if you had to put your money down, seeing what you're saying.
America is the most heavily armed civilian population in all of human history, and the majority of those heavily armed civilian populations would all be extremely traditionalist Christians. I don't think you pick a fight with those. Like, the question, of course, is what the state military decides. Like, if the state military decides to go one way, the citizenry is in an awful lot of trouble. But, and this is an interesting question in terms of the disagreement. And I've said this to Jason before. So it's I don't want to be too redundant, or pedantic, but it is always worth bringing up. Is this idea that the will to progress and the will to shoot forward and create technology and the will to carry this Western spirit towards innovation is like completely understandable. And I think it appeals to people perhaps like ourselves, if we're to be so flattering, to suggest that we have a very open mind. We're very open-minded. We think intellectually, we think about big ideas, we think abstractly, but we are 10%, 15% of the population at best. And the vast bulk out of which we come, like our families don't generally have the traits that we would have. And this is something that highly intellectual people will often notice. They might feel somewhat isolated in their family, and they're able to leave their family, go to a university, and come across a fraternity of people based on intellect. And this is why like structures like the Freemasons and various secret societies and things like this would appear, because it gives highly open-minded people a place to go, where they're away from tradition and nomos and culture, which is more about just operations and existing and, like maybe even farming culture or whatever it is like this. And this becomes a very serious issue because this is maybe even an old Catholic idea, the idea of the body politic. And the body politic would suggest that perhaps we open-minded people are like the brain, or maybe a part of the brain. And then you have like the politicians who are another part of the brain, the executives. But then the huge 60% of the body is like the muscles and the organs, and they're just churning away, farming stuff, driving trucks. And, like these people matter. Like they're a pretty big deal. And I don't think anything else, I don't think the brain exists without the body. And these two things should all be in harmony. And so the sort of defense mechanism, in fact, like I like to try understand the consciousness of the folk. And they right now feel attacked by the Silicon Valley types. They feel like those people, specifically in the cities, have waged war upon them and have turned on them and are literally attempting to genocide them, which is what a lot of people think. They're like, you want to eviscerate the white middle class. You want to get rid of us. You're moving all these people into our countries. You're humiliating us. You're using technology to shut us down. And it's like that existential push in these people. Like the body can just turn around and be like, gun to the head, get rid of the brain. Like it can do stuff like this. And then you have to look at what traditionalism and Christianity and perennialism, paganism, what all these things offer to people and why people default back to them. And I don't think Jason is unaware of this. I'm not making that accusation, but it's something that's very big to compete with. Like people go to tradition because tradition offers them life. You think about what religion offers on first principles, strip away the ideological stuff, and you realize that like a church gives you a community. It'll give you you meet your girl there. You'd have a network that you can participate in. You have a stable family life in society. You've got rituals of life such as funerals, baptism, marriages. These things all engage you with processes of life that are good. And like, tech accelerationism doesn't. That is going to attract you towards like not having to figure that stuff out for yourself. And a lot of people now, alienated and nihilistic, are definitely going to feel that. And so traditionalism is rising for this reason. And again, like even another conflict that I think will turn into a huge one is among traditionalism. Jason already alluded to this. Christianity is splitting off, and I think neo-paganism is seriously starting to rise up again. And you're seeing now like traditionalist neo-pagans and traditionalist Christians bashing up against each other because they're sort of saying like, some of them are like, should there be a European paganism because Christianity has failed, and Christians are like, we are definitely going to be Christian, and these types of things as well. So like I think you're well aware of what I'm pointing out here, and it's something to think about. But yeah, it's something I'm just very cautious about.
But what about the orthobros and the tradcaths as far as how well they get along, or do you anticipate there being a war between them as well?
No, like definitely not. I don't want to get too much into those niches and all this. Like the general point is we, quite open-minded, propagating a futurism. And I think futurism is a very interesting idea as well. We're propagating a futurism, a technological futurism, an embrace of technology. And you asked about Ireland earlier. I'm seeing this there as well, and I'll explain that later. And whatever about what happens with traditionalism, pagan, Christian, whatever. The reason why people are defaulting back to that traditionalism is because they want rituals, habits, they want culture, they want stability, they want this type of order. And it's almost like a question of, what happens if we make unnecessary enemies out of them? Because like, I think they'll win. I think like if they have all the weapons, it's like in America anyway, it's going to be a big question.
Well, let me make a very serious response to that. Okay. Because I think it's unfortunate to frame things in these terms. That battle doesn't need to take place. See, and this is at least not at this juncture. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important that Trump come back into office. Okay, I've had my problems with Trump. Believe me, toward the end of his second term, I was ranting about all kinds of things that I thought he was doing wrong, serious policy mistakes that he made. But the fact of the matter is that, unfortunately, we are going to face some form of second civil war in this country. That is the situation that we find ourselves in. It makes a great deal of difference how that civil war unfolds. If the deep state, I mean, this Biden, I mean, he's a potato, okay? He's not anything.
Is that a racist comment towards the Irish, Jason?
No, I take it back. My dear Irish, I'm a quarter Irish myself. I take it back.
Okay, good.
Very much the wrong way.
I almost just switched the woke side there for a second, but you're all right.
He's retarded. Let's call him a retarded marionette, all right? So he's not, my point is he's a zero. He's a cipher. What he represents is the deep state. And by the way, have you ever asked yourself why they keep such a clearly debilitated person in that position? It's because they can manipulate him completely. So he's the perfect cipher for the deep state. And so the contest here is between the deep state on the one hand, and here we're talking about big business that's in league with China, people who during COVID sold us out to China, right? The global bankers, so on and so forth. The people who want to create a central bank digital currency and combine it with a social credit, ubiquitous surveillance system on the model of China, but for the whole world, right? So you've got them behind Biden. And Trump is standing against that. And you can see from what they're doing to him in the legal system, you know, how deeply terrified of him the deep state is in this country. It matters a great deal whether it's the former group or whether it's Trump that prevails in November. Because I have no doubt that Trump will win the election. But if there's some kind of a manipulation to deny Trump's return into office, yet again, then we're going to see a civil war where the red states will secede from the Union. And in that kind of a scenario, I think what Steph is saying is absolutely right. That first of all, the reactionary ideological basis for this secessionist movement will be extremely traditionalist. It will be evangelically Christian for the most part and very traditionalist. And, you know, you're absolutely right. I mean, these people have more guns than the entire United States military combined. I mean, the people in the red states have more guns and ammo than the entire United States military. Okay, so it's very clear how that struggle would end. And then you're going to have the blue states that are left completely collapse from within. They're going to implode. Without the red states, this wokeism and these cultural Marxist policies are going to accelerate, and they're going to liquidate these states from within. All right, so California, New York, whatever, they're going to turn into like versions of Brazil and South Africa and so on and so forth. And then what's left of the heartland of America will become some regressive, Christian evangelical biblical republic. That's a disaster. That's the worst thing that could possibly happen, not just for America, but for Western civilization at large, and consequently for humanity. Okay? Now, if Trump comes back in, it's a very different scenario. Because the thing you have to remember is that a lot of these so-called blue states are, territorially speaking, red. I mean, my state of New York, or the state that I'm speaking to you from right now, California, are actually red states when you look at the counties, the control of territory and of resources. The problem are the cities. These metropolitan areas with incredibly dense populations, large ghettos, are actually what we mean when we talk about blue America. It's not a question of states. And so if the federal government is in the hands of of Trump and the kinds of people that he would surround himself with in his second term, who, by the way, are going to be a very different group of people than served in his first administration. I think he's learned a lesson. And Trump and his associates are going to be able to isolate the problem far more effectively. And it will not be a battle of red states versus blue states. It will be more like, let's say, urban riot control and counterterrorism focused on metropolitan areas. That's a completely different scenario. And there's a scenario where we don't have to have this extremely regressive ideological reaction of the evangelical Christians, right? And where we don't have to have this polarization between tech-savvy accelerationist people in places like, Silicon Valley on the one hand, and then, biblical fundamentalists on the other hand. We can avoid that scenario because, after all, Trump himself, he's a New York industrialist construction magnate. Okay, this guy is not the candidate of the Bible Belt.
He had a skit where he was with Mayor Giuliani, who was wearing like a wig and painted his face like a woman, and he was talking about how beautiful her perfume is. Like, this is not a traditional person by any stretch of the imagination. But I do have a quick question regarding the Christian movements in the U.S., because you were talking about evangelicals, who are, from what I understand, the subset of Protestantism. But the people who seem to be more of like the brains online, at least, for all the very online people, are either going to be Catholics or Orthodox. Like, for example, if you take a look at the Whatever podcast, that's Orthodox. So,
I don't want to get into the weeds of Christian sectarianism here. It's really not only is it beside the point of the Colossus project, the Colossus project is in a way a project to make it beside the point. And so it's just a very counterproductive tangent to take to get into various forms of Christian sectarianism. Look, what I think is undisputable is this, that America has no cohesive and distinct identity other than as the Prometheus of the world. Okay, if you think America is defined by Salem, or like, the Puritan colonies or something, you don't understand the history of the country that you're living in, right? America became a nation. It became, if you look at it in Heideggerian terms, a folk through its Promethean achievements and through all of this, very, visionary science fiction and cosmic mythology that it elaborated in things like Star Trek and Star Wars and, the various superhero mythologies. And so actually even going all the way back to the era of Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft, right? That's America. And it's quintessentially Promethean. And in the case of a Trump victory, I think that we can avoid this kind of extreme polarization that Steph is pointing toward. And we can buy time to help America to more explicitly recognize and to reappropriate the mythos and the ethos that it's already defined by on a subconscious level, right? So to make that tangible, one of the things that we're proposing to do as part of this Colossus project is that we want to kind of alchemically transform this trash NFT culture into a vehicle for initiation into the mythos and ethos of Prometheus. We have an idea to make NFTs that will represent the whole range of symbolism and of imagery from various episodes in the Prometheus mythos. So not just NFTs of the statue itself, but of everything from the Titanomachia, the Battle of the Gods and the Titans, how Prometheus actually initially helped Zeus to overthrow Kronos, which is a symbol of the assertion of free will over fatalism, right? To Prometheus's creation of man and, the imagery of Athena giving man his soul in the form of a butterfly, which is a symbol for the human potential, what Prometheus had as his vision for humanity's destiny, for humanity defining its own destiny and realizing its own potential, all the way through, Prometheus being chained to the Caucasus and so on and so forth, his being freed by Hercules. We want to take all of the different aspects of this myth and the meanings that are encoded in them and basically incorporate them into this aesthetically superb NFT project, not like the crap aesthetics of, the Bored Ape Yacht Club or whatever, right? And with the kind of intellectual sophistication that, for example, the Cicada project had. I don't know if you've heard of that project, the Cicada 3301, where this very enigmatic group of hackers basically disseminated these puzzles through the internet that sent people on quests to discover various hidden information. They used steganographic methods, information hidden within images. They used decoding of music and so on and so forth to basically identify a group of highly talented, highly motivated people, which then potentially could be recruited for other purposes. And so we have a whole initiatic quest that we intend to embed within this NFT project, which is, of course, also a fundraising mechanism. But for example, we want to have a nationwide treasure hunt where the NFTs unlock information that sends you to a particular locale where there's actual buried treasure. And what the treasure would be are artifacts from the Prometheus mythos. So, for example, there would, of course, be the torch, but then things like the axe that Prometheus used to slice through the skull of Zeus to give birth to Athena. There would be, for example, Pandora's box. Of course, Pandora is part of the Prometheus myth. One of the ways in which Zeus punishes Prometheus is that he basically makes Prometheus's forgetful brother Epimetheus fall in love with Pandora, who comes together with her box, that then, out of their insatiable curiosity, they open, letting loose all these ills and misfortunes into the world. So there'll be, for example, Pandora's box, and each of these implements, the axe, the torch, the box, so on and so forth, they will, maybe the bow that Hercules uses to shoot down the eagle that's devouring Prometheus's liver. Each of these implements would be a unique one-off forged crafts object. We have a smith who's going to craft these objects, and there'll be only one of each of them. And so you're going on a hunt for an object that will become a relic of great value, especially in hindsight in the future. So we intend to have quests of that kind of like, in a way, the maze in the Westworld television series.
What are they made of?
What, the objects?
The objects.
Metal, probably.
Now, as far as this NFT project goes, I would actually make the case that my mentioning of the Whatever podcast is extremely appropriate for this, and I'll tell you why. Because we're living in an attention economy. Right now, the reason why I was questioning these evangelical boomers is because at least the attention that is being gotten today online are from these various, Fresh and Fit, whatever, these various podcasts which have a lot of sexuality in them. They bring in all these OnlyFans girls and things like that. And if we're being, very sober about what exactly is going to bring eyes to the Prometheus project you're doing right now, how much does that play a role? Are you looking to only get like, yeah?
I agree. You're right. And there I agree with you very much that, being entirely sober and overly intellectual about how we present this project is entirely the wrong way to go about it. It has to have class, and intrinsically has class, okay, because of the symbolism that we're dealing with. And it is going to be a classical sculpture, okay? Mm-hmm. But it needs to be presented in a way that's attractive to young people of our era, and NFTs are one vehicle for doing that. And it's actually very Promethean to take something that's trashy like that and to alchemically transmute it into gold, into something meaningful. And instead of NFTs being a manifestation of nihilism, they can become a vehicle for a recoding of the world with meaning. So that's one of the things that we plan to do. And, it will extend to having different tiers of NFTs where, let's say, the people who have the highest tier NFTs wind up having their names inscribed on a shard that's put into the torch of the statue when it's constructed, right? So that's one of the ideas that we have. But to go back to Trump for a moment, I think that it should be obvious to anyone that a project like the one we're proposing has as a sine qua non, as a fundamental precondition, the return of Trump to office. Because, well, first of all, in a country where the federal government is dominated by cultural Marxism and SJW agendas, there's very little hope for a project like this succeeding. Okay. And one of the main reasons for that, especially if we actually intend to build it on Alcatraz, is that Alcatraz is part of the National Park Service. And the National Park Service was established by actually Woodrow Wilson in it was 1916. But Teddy Roosevelt did a lot of the groundwork for it. Teddy Roosevelt, was a great conservationist who basically set up the national parks. But then the legal framework for the national park system was set up by President Woodrow Wilson. And so it's under the executive of the United States. It's not under the legislative, okay? So the president of the United States can, by executive order, take a national park and turn it over to private interests, okay? Or nullify the status of a certain area as a national park. And I think that we can very clearly make that case to Trump. And I think that under the right conditions, he would be extremely sympathetic to it, especially as the construction magnate that he is.
So let me slip in there, because I think there's a interesting derivative set of ideas from this. You spoke about it being exciting to the youth. Now, we talk about NFTs, and I don't want to disrespect that at all, because I do think crypto and NFTs are fascinating technologies, but there's an inherent bombast to statues. This is a very Nietzschean notion, but architecture is the fundamental art of the will to power, because it's the manifest of presence in its most profound and powerful form. And of course, if we think about ancient Greece and its lordly capacity, it's like, what defines the Western spirit outside of the sort of biblical strangulation of Islam saying that you cannot, create images, or the iconography of the Orthodox Church and the problems that even the Catholics had with this, or even when the Protestants first started to arrive and they started to mar out images and say that it must all be text. What are you seeing there? You're seeing this attempt to destroy the manifest, the three-dimensional structural reality, the visuospatial mastery of creating a statue. And then if we look back and we say, well, what is the quintessential symbol of Western excellence? What will come up pretty quickly will be the statue of David, with the sling over his shoulder by Michelangelo, or Perseus holding up Medusa's head, looking all domineering and powerful. And it's almost like, it is obviously like bodybuilding, where we strike these poses of power and we strike these poses of majesty. And this is exciting, I think. Like, if you could litter statues like this all across the West now, each one of these that goes up would arouse so much vitriol. People would be freaking about this stuff. And I don't say this without grounds. Think of all the vitriol that's gone into the statues that get pulled down, for example. I think there was that big thing that happened in 2017 Charlottesville, where they were doing that protest for the statues were getting pulled down, and so like all these guys go and they go to a march there, and even since then they took the Robert Lee statue and they burned it down. And like this, there's something very powerful to this, because the pulling down of the statues is the conquest of the gods. It's the twilight of the idols. What did the Christians do in Rome? They snapped off the noses and tore down the statues and boasted that they were killing demons when they did this. They were killing spirits. And so the idea of getting like Prometheus up there and like a figure of Western exceptionalism, which is obnoxiously pro-Western and believes in itself and is naked and is like has a physique of a creator and reaches forward to the future, the vision of the Olympian man, which is sort of what Prometheus is in regards to the fire. This is huge. Like, I think like if I can imagine it in social media, if something like this is pulled off, people going to it and taking their pictures of it, and like 1 million pictures showing up every single year of people being in like, what, this thing is crazy, man. Like, it almost markets itself, because it's the reality of an idea. It's an idea dematerialized out of the fifth dimension and appearing in our dimension, that you can touch, that has a presence that's bigger than you. It's scary. It's like watching a big, animal when you're a tiny little mouse or something like this. So there's something powerful about that. I think there's something very, very powerful about that to consider. And it's like, if something like that happens, that's a very big trend reverse. Because right now, like what you see happening with statues is, in England, Churchill was a racist, or they're pulling down statues and throwing them. I remember during BLM, I think they threw a statue of some English colonist into the water. And Ireland, we haven't had anything like that happen yet, but I can imagine, I can see it coming. I don't see why that stuff wouldn't happen. Graffiti on it. What is like the climate change guys doing to the Mona Lisa? They're going in and putting orange on it and things like this. So there's something very powerful about that. And if that doesn't work, if that type of vital energy isn't there, like, I don't know, I'll strip. I'll do the OnlyFans stuff. Like I'm here for the cause. You can set up the whatever cast is good.
I just want to add one quick thing there. Do you also think that people are going to be comparing this to, to invoke, what is that law? The one that talks about how every conversation ends up leading to, Mr. H. If we're talking about, that certain event that happened in the mid-20th century, how many people do you think, Jason, are going to be comparing this statue of a naked man full of vitality with what was going on in the Third Reich?
Many.
And what would be your response?
So here's what I think. Look, actually, that's not a bad way to frame what it is that I was about to say anyway. Because, there was this guy in the Reich called Arno Brecker. He was a German sculptor, and he actually sculpted 2 statues of Prometheus, rather large-scale ones. So this is not entirely, a tangent to what it is that I was about to say, which is that, look, we are not aiming to manufacture a piece of propaganda out of stone here, okay? Which is one of the reasons why I'm involved with the project as a philosopher, right? I mean, there are some very subtle things to understand about the relationship between aesthetics and politics on the one hand, and between aesthetics and truth in a philosophical sense on the other, where, as people like Nietzsche and Heidegger understood, the truth can come to manifestation through a work of art, right? There's this essay that Heidegger wrote on The Origin of the Work of Art, which is very much about this, which is about the unconcealment of truth through a work of art like a sculpture. And Prometheus in particular is a very important symbol that can allow art to rediscover a truth that's been lost to a whole world. And that's what we're trying to do with this project ultimately, is to catalyze a civilizational renaissance on that level using aesthetics. So the beauty of the piece has to transcend any mere propaganda. At the same time, what Steph is saying is absolutely right, that clearly the context for the project is the tearing down of all these statues for the past, I don't know, what's it been now, 6-7 years or so. And he mentioned 2017. Well, it got really bad in 2020. And I remember when even in New York City, I loved the Museum of Natural History. It's still one of my favorite places in New York City, Museum of Natural History, because they have these chambers, the oldest parts of the museum where you can go there and it's like a time warp with these huge African elephants and, boats of the Indians of the Pacific Northwest. And it's just a very magical place, the Museum of Natural History. And at the imposing entrance to the Museum of Natural History was a giant statue of Teddy Roosevelt on horseback, because Teddy Roosevelt set up the American Museum of Natural History, as a conservationist. And they tore that statue down.
Whoa, really? I didn't know this.
What did President Roosevelt ever do? How was he a slave owner or anything, right? God was a conservationist. He even helped out the Indians. In any case, they tore that one down. I remember that vividly. But what was worse than that, and what's much more apropos of our conversation, is this piece that they themselves put up, these SJWs with their, corporate backers, this piece that they put up called Oracle at the front of Rockefeller Plaza. And it was so large that it completely obscured the Prometheus statue. And this was the purpose, that this piece, this monstrosity, would eclipse Prometheus so you could no longer see him when you walk down Fifth Avenue. And what was the sculpture? Get this. It was Zeus enthroned, holding the torch of Prometheus, Zeus, having stolen the torch back from Prometheus, wearing a gigantic African mask. Okay?
It almost looked like a stereotype as far as...
Even black people were offended by it. Okay? So now, in a way, what we're doing is a response to something like the monstrosity of the Oracle sculpture at Rockefeller Plaza, which fortunately it was eventually removed from there, and it was actually brought to a part of LA where I'm at right now, where it belongs. It belongs a little better there. And
I think it's following you, Jason, but whatever.
Yeah, probably. But, we're going to get the better of them with this project. And you're absolutely right, Steph, that it will be the most galvanizing lightning rod that one could imagine through social media and in culture at large once the construction of this monument begins.
Yeah, I can imagine it. I think
you put it this way: try to tear this one down.
Yeah, well,
come try to tear this one down. Well, just try, right? Because I'm convinced that these same people who tore down the sculptures of our presidents and other culture heroes of America, they will eventually come after busts of Plato and Aristotle. Mark my words. They're going to say Aristotle justified slavery. They're going to topple busts of Aristotle. They're going to say Plato was a eugenicist, and they're going to tear statues of Plato from out of universities and smash them on the ground. Okay, and if you want to find the one symbol which, even more than Aristotle, even more than Plato, epitomizes the brilliance of the Western mind and its forward momentum, that is the Titan Prometheus. And we're going to build it on the largest scale imaginable, and we're going to build it on a goddamn fortress.
Let's go.
Let's go.
One down.
Now, as far as the people who are against this, and Steph, I would love to start with you on this. From your observation of what's going on in Ireland, where they're bringing in, migrants that have absolutely nothing to do with the culture of your home. Who are we talking about here? Are we talking about just these lefty activists that were brainwashed going all the way back to the USSR? Or are we talking about something much more organized and something much more well-funded here? Like, from your observation, then I would love to hear from Jason.
I would say, first of all, that I do have some questions, like I'd maybe even a pushback question and like a challenging question, so I can understand obviously the symbolism underneath this and the big audacious side of this. And I guess in some sense you're already answering this, but it is something that will be floating in the back of people's minds, because we're after saying something like we're coming up to a crisis. We have a huge civil war present. We have traditionalism rising up. Maybe we even have this like massive force that's going to go against the left. Why such an investment? Because I can imagine hundreds of millions of dollars might even go into this. Like, it could be a lot. And it's at such a precarious time that I could think of so many other places that you could put that wealth to secure the future. And you could put that type of energy and this type of stuff. Now, of course, I understand the symbolic side of it, but I guess I'd like to offer this to Jason just to give his thoughts on. It seems like this huge investment of capital, of intellectual energy, of spiritual energy, and like, why wouldn't this be going into political candidates to make sure that everything is secured for e-accelerationism or whatever the game is or something like this? Like, why is it going into something that would be viewed as unpragmatic? That it's like almost like profligate. You're building a statue that's there, it's 8 figures buried into that, and there we go. And what next? So how does this make sense as a goal?
Because nothing is more important than the temples or the oracles of a people. Political candidates come and go. We're building a monument that will last a millennium and that will someday hopefully remind people of the glorious renaissance of their civilization. Nothing is more important than the temples or the oracles of a people. But at the same time, remember that Prometheus also schemed to undercut Zeus's demand for sacrifice from humans. People only remember Prometheus as a trickster, qua the thief of fire from the theft of fire from the forge of Hephaestus. But Prometheus, in his guise as a trickster, engaged in many machinations to undermine the power of Zeus. And one of the other most important ones is that when Zeus asked Prometheus, because Prometheus was the father of humanity. Prometheus created humanity. So Zeus comes to Prometheus and asks him, well, determine how your children are to sacrifice to me and to the Olympians. And Prometheus puts 2 bowls in front of Zeus. And one of them consists of a bowl full of bones covered by marbled fat. and the other is a bowl that has basically like all of the lean meat from a slaughtered animal, but packed into a very unpleasant looking stomach of an animal, sewn into an animal stomach. And Zeus chooses the attractive marbled fat, not realizing that underneath it is all bones, right? And what is that meant to signify? It's meant to signify the fact that Prometheus thought that we actually don't owe the sacrifice of anything valuable to any overlords above ourselves, right? And so in a sense, Prometheus is profoundly iconoclastic. He is a divinity that's asking humans to not submit to any overlords, but in a way that makes a temple and a shrine to Prometheus all the more important. Something has to hold that place of the Godhead. Something has to enshrine the sacred in the world of a people, right? And be the nexus for the tapestry of meaning that makes their future development possible. And so I don't think you could even put a price tag on the value of something like that monument on Alcatraz, right? With the demolished prison as its kind of, netherworld, underworld foundation. It is a sacred precinct that we're really attempting to erect here. And you can't put a monetary value on something like that. I mean, it has the status of Delphi for the classical Greeks. That's really what we're
But back in classical Greece, real quick, back in classical Greece, how many regular Greek people knew what the statue of, or what the various statues and what the Oracle of Delphi was about? How many Americans would have any idea who Prometheus is, what this naked man holding a torch is all about?
Well, listen, for one, the NFT project can help with that. But we also have many other cultural projects, because Steph is right, that a project like this has a very large budget, okay? And so as a much smaller portion of that budget, there are all kinds of media projects that we're going to develop that will popularize this myth. Films, videos, animations, and so forth, that we intend to disseminate on the way to the construction of this monument. So you're right, it needs to be popularized. At the same time, I think there's something to be said for, esoteric and exoteric strata of different cultures, simply because not every Greek fully understood what the Oracle at Delphi is, doesn't mean that the Oracle of Delphi did not perform an absolutely vital role for the Greek culture.
There's also precedence for this. This is actually, interestingly, affirmation of what you're suggesting, and also a extremely serious challenge to it. This is the Cristo Redentor in Brazil, because the perfect example of this, like what does Christ represent? The Logos. And what is the Logos? It's the hinge point of reality, the Platonic form of reality. So in the Christian worldview, Christ is it. He is the centerpiece that holds everything together. And so the Brazilians, they did the same in Portugal, but in Lisboa, but they also do it in Brazil, and I think it's Sao Paulo, I'm not quite sure, Rio de Janeiro, and up in the hill, big Cristo Redentor.
It's in Rio.
Yeah.
And
Jesus, so like
Jesus of Rio, that's right.
And this is the
bigger, by the way. But anyway, go ahead.
It's that precedent for doing something like this is actually like really well established. Like obviously the Statue of Liberty is another one, like it's really, really well established, and it makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure it drives an enormous amount in terms of tourism. It is like, it goes hard. You look at the images from Brazil, and there's just this big dog up in the hill looking down on this enormous city, and the Brazilians love it. Like, and it's like, do people understand Jesus? I think actually almost everybody does. Some people would understand it to much more of a deeper level.
But that's after probably a lot of beatings, a lot of murder, a lot of missionary work. All of that had to be taken into account as far as people knowing Jesus.
But like, I guess, and this does lead then to the kind of challenge. And again, it's another challenge.
Listen, the whole of sci-fi, modern Western culture, not just in America, also let's say in France, is an expression of the Prometheus archetype. So there is all of that precedent as well. But Lev, can you bring up the website? Actually, can you throw that onto the screen? Because we actually have a little image of Jesus of Rio on a scale of various colossi in the world there That would
So
be
you're going to mug it.
Yeah.
Is that the plan?
Oh,
All
yeah,
right.
watch this. Yeah.
Give me a second here.
a
Let
nice-
me bring it up. Blah, blah,
And you
blah.
mentioned the Statue of Liberty. So obviously, these two colossi are bookends in America. We have the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, and then this is the other bookend, the Colossus of Prometheus in San Francisco Bay.
Where do I go?
Oh, it looks good. It looks good. Holy shit.
Yeah, it's a good website, AmericanColossus.org.
I should shout out Ross Calvin, because I believe he's actually done the design and the building for all of this. So,
well, not only that, but listen, happy birthday, Ross.
well, there you go, top dog.
Here, let me get rid of these for a second, just so people have a better.
Let's come back to Jesus and Rio. Pull up Ross's picture, Lev. It's toward the bottom on the board.
Is that the comparison though? I think you just skipped past it.
Yeah, no, I know, but I just wanted to show Ross.
Okay.
All right, where is the? Go up.
Back. No. Go back down to the board photos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so this is Ross Calvin with the tie. Just click on that for a minute.
Good Irish head in them.
Yes, I believe Scottish, actually.
Oh, God. Oh, close.
But
We'll
you're
say
all
Gaelic.
closely related anyway. Scots-Irish.
We'll say Gaelic.
Can you... I guess people can see that large. It's small on my screen, but there's Ross's bio. And then if you want to click back on the main page, on the board photos again.
Mm-hmm.
And if you click on the other side, there's Dario Mutabgia. And I want to say a few words about Dario as well. There's a very truncated version of his bio. Dario just joined us on the board of American Colossus as well. And he is a friend of mine and a very fascinating individual. Dario proposed to build a seastead off the coast of San Francisco that would bring international talent to Silicon Valley without having to pass through the conventional visa system of the United States, to basically be able to use tourist visas to ferry people from this seastead into Silicon Valley and back. And Dario's real interest in that seasteading project wasn't so much the physical construction, but the idea of individual liberty and autonomy. And so eventually Dario migrated from working on seastead development. By the way, for those who don't know, seastead is a term based on homestead, and it refers to a moored structure at least 12 nautical miles beyond the territorial border of any country, beyond the coastline of any country. So it's a moored seastead in international waters, which means it's outside of the legal jurisdiction of any nation. And what appealed to Dario about that was the idea of individual autonomy and personal sovereignty in the face of this global surveillance state that we're being subjected to. And so Dario migrated from a focus on seasteads to a focus on blockchain and crypto technology, which is what he's more involved with today, and which is actually a point of conjunction between his work and that of Ross. As I mentioned earlier, Ross is also heavily involved with blockchain and crypto development, particularly in the area of international energy resources and the trade of minerals. So these are the two gentlemen who are on the board of American Colossus, and then of course myself. And it's a great pleasure for me to work with both of them. If you want to go back up to the statues, Lev.
Mm-hmm. Here we go.
Okay, so Jesus of Rio, he's the smallest one. Well, will you look at that? He's the little guy. Jesus of Rio. Right? Mm-hmm. He's the smallest one right there. And then we have the Statue of Liberty in the third position. And then in orange is our projected Prometheus Colossus.
Nice. Now, what is the Statue of Unity over here?
I believe that's in China.
Well, talk about unity. I mean, that's going to be another thing I want to ask you as far as what you see happening with China, but we'll get into it later on.
I have a couple of questions here. So, first of all, why the stance? Why Prometheus triumphantly holding the fire, as opposed to, for example, Prometheus maybe reaching off the rock with a vulture, snagging at his liver, and Prometheus like snatching something off Zeus? What was the thought in there, or is that even not a question that has been really straightened out at the moment?
Oh no, it's a great question. It's the triumphant posture, right? I mean, we don't want a sculpture of Prometheus chained to the rock. We don't want a sculpture of the eagle devouring Prometheus's liver, which, by the way, is for those who are not familiar, is a symbol for Prometheus's foresight. The Greeks used the liver for fortune telling, for seeing the future. And so this is the idea that Prometheus knows better than Zeus and can see further ahead. And the eagle, as a proxy of Zeus, is trying to appropriate the power of Prometheus. So in any case, we didn't want, a symbol of Prometheus, the victim or the prisoner, at the mercy of Zeus. We wanted Prometheus triumphant and holding aloft the symbol of the fire of the forge, of technological innovation and scientific discovery, right? After all, this is a symbol that's in part meant to resuscitate Silicon Valley and, to inspire our regaining our competitive advantage over China and other technological rivals in the world. So I think the fire, the torch, is very key to the Colossus having that significance. But something that I want to say in that regard also is that when you look at the website, I mean, it's very nicely done, some of the images, of the Colossus there, but there is a sort of anonymous, fash, wavy look to, these AI renderings of the sculpture. And we've had, a number of private conversations, as you can imagine, about this. And one ought not to expect that the final product would be that anonymous looking, okay? Prometheus is also a symbol of individuality and uniqueness. So the actual physiognomy and the features of Prometheus, I think, are going to be much more individuated and interesting than some just very anonymous, athletic Greek sculpture that could be anyone. I mean, you need to capture the fact that Prometheus is a visionary and a strategist, let's say, right? I mean, Prometheus should not be channeling the energy of Apollo, which some of these images that we have up there have a very Apollonian quality to them. Prometheus is more like Loki than he is like Apollo. And I think that will be reflected in the final design of the sculpture.
Steph, your thoughts?
So I'm going to go back to something I was going to ask a moment ago, because I think this is good. Now it's a bit calling back to a question we've already asked, but it is something worth putting up there. I'm being the black pillar here in the corner, so you got to forgive me the whole way through this. We're asserting a symbol from pagan Greek mythology. We're asserting a symbol of obnoxious progressivism. We're dealing with an American nation that is majority Christian. We're dealing with an American nation that's incredibly paranoid right now, to the point where they do the Oscars and they're like, oh, Satan worship. Oh, they're doing another satanic ritual. It's happening. They're doing the thing where some woman's dancing. It's probably fucking true, to be honest. And they're seeing the symbolism everywhere. And we're suggesting here that we're going to take 8-9 figures off investors and pour it into building a pagan symbol off the coast of America, looking down upon America as a symbol to try drive America forward. And it's like, how is this not going to inspire enormous vitriol against not only the left, but the Christians then as well? Like the two biggest factions turn against them. And I could see it maybe as like the demos, are just going to throw up arms. And they were like, no, they're going to have reasons against it on all sides. And they're going to try tear it down. They're going to say, well, no, Jesus is our guy around here. This can't happen. Or they'll say, no statues can go up except for the ones that we decide, or something like this. So what has been your thoughts on this? Like, what do you do when inevitably they're like, well, the logos that we see is the Christo Redentor that we want to see built there?
Let them try. But they didn't stop the Statue of Liberty from being built. They didn't stop Prometheus from being built at Rockefeller Center at the heart of New York City, right? Look, we're not building this in Mobile, Alabama, or even Nashville, okay? We're building it in San Francisco, all right, at the gateway to Silicon Valley. There's something to be said for place here and context. I don't think that the kinds of folks who, from the right, would be interested in dynamiting this statue are probably going to be able to swarm around it. I think that our immediate problem will be with the left and the reaction of the left to this statue. That having been said, I think that, we shouldn't surrender the struggle for America's identity. To go back to what I was elaborating on earlier about what it is that quintessentially defines this country, right? And is to account for its unique identity, not just in the world, but within the West. What it is that's allowed America to lead the West for the last century or so, namely America's Promethean character. And it's clear that if you were to go back to, I don't know, the Pilgrims or the people who burned witches at Salem, and you were to show them the Statue of Liberty standing in New York Harbor, they would think that Satan had taken over their country. I mean, clearly.
Yeah. Well, especially if they find out that whole symbolism, from what I understand, is Mithraic and has to do with a man putting on a woman's outfit.
Yes, so the Statue of Liberty, and Bartholdi knew this because he was a Freemasonic initiate. The Statue of Liberty is actually a statue of Mithra in the second degree of initiation. Well, actually, it combines more than one degree of initiation, the symbolism for more than one degree of initiation. But prominent is the second degree, which is Nymphus, where the initiate basically had to dress in female garb, and where the initiate was holding a torch up in female garb. But then also they incorporate in the Statue of Liberty the symbolism of Heliodromos, because in the sixth grade, which is the solar charioteer, Mithra is actually holding a torch aloft, not only as a beacon of enlightenment. Remember, the Statue of Liberty is called Liberty Enlightening the World. That's the official name of the statue. But in the sixth grade of initiation in Mithraism, that torch being held aloft is a flame that Mithra is about to cast down upon the earth to create a conflagration that purifies the earth and basically brings a paradise at the end of history. Okay, it's called the Freshkar, the purification of the earth by molten metal at the apocalypse, coming from ancient Iranian mythology. And if you look at the statue of Prometheus at Rockefeller Center, Prometheus is emerging from out of a rock, and Mithra was said to be born from a rock, from out of a rock, which again connects to what we're doing on Alcatraz, right? Prometheus emerging from the rock. And the Prometheus at Rockefeller Center, the sculpture by Paul Manship, is also soaring up through the constellations, through the zodiacal constellations, which are a symbol of Kronos. Prometheus defeated Kronos. Likewise, Mithra, in Mithraism, overpowers Kronos by moving the gearwork of the zodiacal constellations, and therefore unshackling humanity from the powers of fate and allowing us to reclaim our self-determination, right? And reassert our free will. Yeah. And so in that sense, he's also Mithra. And then finally, the Prometheus at Rockefeller Center, he's holding a flame in his hand. He's not holding a torch, he's holding a flame in his hand. And this is very specifically the symbol of Heliodromos, the sixth grade of Mithraic initiation, where Mithra is about to not bring fire necessarily just down from heaven, but to cast fire upon the earth, which is something, by the way, that the Christians stole in terms of Jesus's phraseologies in the Gospels about how Jesus is here to cast fire upon the earth and so on, baptize the world in fire. All that comes from Mithraism, where Mithra, like Prometheus, steals fire from the heavens to bring it down as a force of illumination and enlightenment for mankind. But Prometheus also, Mithra also casts fire down upon the earth at the apocalypse for the sake of the triumph of the righteous. And so all of this is also encoded in a way in what we're doing on the other rock, right? Rockefeller Center in New York is also called the Rock. Mm-hmm. This is kind of interesting that Prometheus is on the Rock or at the Rock in New York, and Prometheus is going to be on the Rock in San Francisco. And so, again, in my finally in response to what Steph was saying, they didn't stop the Statue of Liberty. They didn't stop a giant statue of Mithra in female garb from being built in New York Harbor. They didn't stop, Prometheus, prepared to cast fire down upon the world, from being erected at the heart of New York City. And I don't think that it's the place of unenlightened people from some of the more benighted parts of our country to come and stop this Colossus from being erected in San Francisco either.
Now, gentlemen, before we go on, I wanted to check on the time that you have right now as far as the super chats and all of that goes. I don't know why I'm frozen for a second, but that's okay. So let me know how you guys are doing on time.
We can go towards super chats if you'd like, Lev, from my, but maybe...
I've one last question. I've probably about half an hour, 40 minutes, but I've one last question. And this might be another big tangent. So we may as well just fucking go for it while we're here, Jason, you're asserting this as a symbol, the enemy within the state, you're asserting this as the symbol against our more regressive ideas, the irrational spooks of the demos, the demons that are pulling them back. And you're saying, well, listen, our identity is that we are futurists. We are people who believe in the horizon. We are like, what has made America great has been our technological capacity. And actually, there's something very important that you said about Trump that steers into this too. Trump's recent rhetoric, I saw Scott Adams point this out, and I thought it was a very astute observation. Trump has been going around, and remember he was saying the wall. We're going to build a wall. We're going to build a wall. His new symbol this time around is that we're going to build futuristic cities with flying cars. I saw him talking about this, and he's tapping into the futurism. He understands that there's a feeling inside the left that this is very unique, that the left has lost futurism. They've lost progressivism. They've lost technological horizonism, if you so will. And Musk obviously is a great example of this. And because of their cultish instincts, their demos instincts, their almost like tyrannical instincts, they have got so obsessed with that, so into the ideological stuff, that they've actually started to lose the creative, intellectual, you will say Promethean people. And so Trump sees that. He sees that there's a right-codedness that he can grab. There's a spirit he can grab off them and take it for himself and say, not only are the left bad because they're going against the American spirit, but they're also regressive. They're also holding us back. And with me, I will shoot us forward and we'll build futuristic cities. And you look at Dubai and you look at that city that the Arabs are trying to build, Neon, where they're just building this big, long, Lego brick that just stretches out for kilometers across it, which again, like people might look at what you're saying here and say, it's irrational, it's wasteful, it's profligate. It's like, well, look at what the Arabs are up to. The Arabs take Dubai, and in 30 years, they turned a patch of desert into like a super city that so many people flock to at the moment. And it's like, with a bit of imagination, with modern technological capacity, like, fuck me, you can do crazy shit pretty quick. And it's kind of like you've been so browbeaten into being stuck underneath the rock, scared of getting canceled, scared of saying the wrong thing, that you've actually lost your imagination. And that's probably the most depressing thing. It's like you actually could open your eyes up a little bit and realize the things that you could do are much bigger than you think, if only you just had a little bit of spirit. Like Musk just installed a brain interface into the mind of a human being that connects us to technology. That's as historically significant as year zero. Like that's a big deal. That's the arrival of a new brain. He's shooting up rockets into space. Stuff is happening. So it's important to keep this stuff in mind. And the enemies within, Trump, all this stuff, bit of a tangent I went on there, but I think that spirit I understand. Why is this relevant then to the enemies outside of America, outside of the West? Like, why are we looking at this as a symbol that we're going to assert against China? Is this because we want to present an American identity against China, not necessarily as a Christian identity, but we're going to say to China, it's like, we're the innovators, we're the creators, you're the guys who follow us, you replicate what we have, sure, you have like your manufacturing factories, sure, but we're the leaders, we're the first principle. You like, and whatever you're trying to do, whatever world order you're trying to attempt, you're not going to get it because you're not ready to do what we do. We decide, we lead, we put the best stuff forward. We're the ones who lead the world, and this is a symbol of our leadership: is individualism, creativity, innovation, and sort of like shove it in their face as like, you're doing well over there, but you're not doing as well as you think, and you're not going to beat us in this type of form. So, how do you see that as working?
That's exactly right, Steph. So this statue not only faces in toward America from the coast of San Francisco, it faces out toward China. And okay, it puts them on notice that, hey, guess what? We're back. And you've been aping our innovation, but we're going to lead you into a place where you're not even comfortable competing with us anymore. Remember, in Chinese, may you live in interesting times is a curse, right? They hate instability. And so, for example, crypto and blockchain technology is a nightmare for them. This is why they want to, because they have a centrally controlled, state-planned economy. And their long-term economic forecasting depends on stability. So something like the empowering of crypto, Bitcoin, and so forth is an economic nightmare for China. And by the way, Ross is very aware of these things. Ross actually learned Mandarin and went and lived in China for a couple of years. Know thy enemy, okay? And I will tell you, I can't get into the details, but privately, I've looked at some things from him, and I haven't seen a better vision for how to wreck the Chinese economy than what Ross has come up with. So this Colossus is only the beginning of a number of much more robust long-term projects. But yes, it's facing out toward China across the Pacific. And in terms of Christianity, it's important to remember that these traditionalist Orthodox Christians are buying into a worldview that China has been designated to lead. There is a new axis of China, Russia, and the Islamic world, which is going to be structured around the stability of traditionalism. It matches the kind of economic model they want to impose on the world, and it matches the, how can I put it, in some cases, sterility and stagnation of their various cultures, okay? And while I certainly don't want a war.
Hold on, guys. We are coming right back in here.
Negotiate a solution in Europe where we don't wind up in a war with Russia, which is the last thing we need right now. On the other hand, in a cultural and civilizational sense, a Russia that has embraced orthodoxy is entirely aligned with a Neo-Confucian China and with a Neo-Islamic caliphate that's going to be rising in the coming years. And this whole constellation is fundamentally traditionalist and regressive in its orientation. The symbol that America needs to embrace in order to oppose that and to rival it is a Promethean symbol, not something from out of the Abrahamic heritage.
And so would you see this as Dugin, he has this conception of the Eurasian force, like the Eurasian giant. He has that, I think it was like a chaos magic symbol, and he would see like the spinal cord running down from Moscow into Iran basically forms this sort of magic block, which the Nazis were trying to seize as well. And Russia, Islam, and China all form together, and they present traditional.
Sorry, everybody. 1 second. Here we go. I think it's going to work now.
Fertility. And I'd assume they would probably promote this in response against Western decadence, you could put it this way. Weirdly, though, China, not famously fertile, Russia is abysmally fertile. Like, they don't really have like this very, very fertile civilization, which is quite interesting. But nonetheless, you see that they're doing that because they're trying to, maybe they're going to reject the innovative, progressive destiny that the West has put forward. And they're kind of just going to go back to the sort of meanderings of history and not really have a future destiny. They're just going to they're going to step out of the idea of us having say in our historical destiny, us having say in creating technologies that blast us forward into new paradigms. And they're just going to be like, no, we're not going to do that, guys. Like, we're not, space is cool. Not really going to go there. We're going to kind of lock down here and just create political orders that ramble forward like mankind has done for thousands and thousands of years and perpetuate this. And if they seize the world order, that's what we can kind of come to expect, is that maybe you'll exist, you'll have a family, maybe you'll have a farm. God knows if it'll be as fertile as you might think, but you won't have a future. You won't have any of that stuff. It will be back almost into like a cyclical nature or something. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And what's going to break the axis that you were referring to, Dugin has laid out, is that Iran is going to flip. Iran is going to flip. There is going to be a Promethean Persia. The people of that country are 70% under the age of 30. Iran is one of the youngest countries in the world. It does not have the fertility problems that some other progressive places do. And the people of that country are absolutely fed up, not only with a theocratic Muslim government, they have by and large rejected Islam. One of the polls that I looked at suggests that only 40% of Iranians even still identify with Islam at all. So you have a country which actually 2,600 years ago was the wellspring for the Promethean spirit to migrate to Greece, which is something that Nietzsche knew very well. And that country is about to reclaim its pre-Islamic heritage, and a heritage that is archaeo-futuristic, where they are certainly not going to be interested in going along with China and Russia and the Sunni Muslim world in this regressive direction, right? They will become our best allies in the East, and another beacon for Promethean progress and industrious innovation. So I think we have the turnaround of Iran to look forward to as far as breaking that axis. But this symbol, I think, is important for them as well to see as a beacon in the West, to know that the fight here is not lost, and that they also have allies to look forward to joining forces with in America.
I'm actually reading Thus Spoke Zarathustra again because I'm going to do a big video on it. And I'm getting into all like the background history and all this. And I've been checking out yourself and Neil talking about it and just going into it. And it's very strange that Nietzsche chose him, because it seems so out of left field that he selected Zarathustra. Such a strange choice, you know? And almost like if I was to get Jungian, it's almost like he wasn't doing the choosing type thing. But it has so much prescience to it. The inventor of morality, the projector of a linear history, the projector of the destiny. These type of concepts showing up inside of Zarathustra. So
yeah, it's not, it's not as left field as you might think, because if you look at German scholarship and German intellectual work in that era, actually in about, let's say, the 50 to 100 years leading up to Nietzsche, the Germans invented the field we call Iranology. Iranology, or Iranian studies, was invented by Germans like Hegel, who wrote extensively about Iran. I mean, Hegel was an uber Iranophile, and he basically argued that Western history begins in Iran, not in Greece, and that the whole Greek philosophical scientific dawn owes itself to Persian influence. So Nietzsche and Goethe said that Hafez, the Persian poet Hafez, was the greatest poet who ever wrote in any language. And he wrote this divan, which was kind of a poetic dialogue back and forth with Hafez. So you had these great German thinkers and writers in the decades leading up to Nietzsche who had already valorized the Persians and Zarathustra, where then Nietzsche can take Zarathustra and make him the mouthpiece for, the gospel of the Overman.
And it's there's some quote, because you come across Nietzsche and the whole time he's counter signaling, the Western identity, because trying to shake you up a little bit, and he's talking about how Islam is good and Christianity stole from us the reaping of Mohammedan civilization. Spain, you're like, God damn it, Fred, is this where we're going now? And one time I think he says that it's such a pity that I think maybe the Greeks won in Thermopylae instead of being conquered by the Persians. Because that led to
he says two things. He said that's one thing he said, but the even more striking and related statement that he made was, he said it should have been the Persians who inherited and promulgated the legacy of the Greeks rather than the Romans of all.
Yeah. Like, it's
guys. Can you hear me? By the way.
Yep. Yes, Boomer Lev tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in.
I'm going to take these off just so they don't bother me right now. So we're going to get the super chats. For some reason, my camera is not working really well right now, so I have to improvise. So
could I ask one last question, Lev? Could I ask one last question? Now, and again, Jason, like, I know this is going to be a very politically hot one, so you're under no obligation to answer it. But where do you see Israel in the mix of all this? Because obviously, we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great follow-up question to what I was just saying. Because the thing is that the Persians and the Israelites have 2,500 years of shared history. I don't know to what extent you're aware of this, but I've written about it at length, particularly in my book, Iranian Leviathan. It's the Persians who set up Israel to begin with about 2,500 years ago, stretching from the reign of Cyrus, who freed the Jews from Babylon and commissioned the project for the building of the Second Temple, all the way through Darius, who actually executed the temple building project, and then Xerxes, who had a Jewish wife, and who, according to the account we get in the book of Esther, actually put down a massive conspiracy within the Persian Empire to persecute the Jews. So there is a very ancient history of the basically collaboration between the Persians and the Israelites. And when you look at the details of it, what you see, and this is a little bit esoteric, you know, the devil's in the details. You have to read my book, Iranian Leviathan. What you see is that it has to do with Mithraism, and it has to do with Plato's idea of the noble lie and how human belief systems needed to be, how can we put it, constructively restructured. Okay. So the Persians and the Jews have a very ancient history. And in terms of the politics of the contemporary Middle East, recall that prior to the 1979 revolution, Iran and Israel were each other's greatest allies in the Middle East. And now you have, I mean, that was to an extent coming from the state level. It was coming to an extent from the Pahlavi regime and the state security apparatuses of Pahlavi Iran and so on and so forth. But now you have it not from the top down, but from the bottom up. And probably the most pro-American population in the world today is the Iranian population, and the most pro-Israeli population in the world today is the Iranian population. And you can clearly see that in the coming decades, as China and Russia work with a nascent Sunni Islamic caliphate to cement a traditionalist order in the East with a very stable, kind of stagnant economic model, a socialistic economic model, Promethean Persia will ally with Israel as a rebel to break out from that imposed order. So that's how I see Israel. I see Israel as an important ally in the transition of power and the restructuring of sociopolitics in Iran, and as an important element in the breakout of tomorrow's Promethean Persia from this traditionalist regressive order that's taking shape in the Eastern world.
So when I hear that, and again, I don't know the politics of the place too well, and if it becomes redundant, like, we can obviously move off the topic, but I would see Israel as an aggressor against Iran. They from what I understand,
not in the least. Not in the least. Let me tell you, I'm sorry to have to be so blunt, but
okay.
Look, I spent, oh Lord, I don't know, 2 decades of my life in Iranian nationalist politics, and it got to the point where I actually, it was August 11th, 2017, I introduced a coalition of Iranian nationalist political parties to the world in the English language. I was, picked to give that speech. It's on YouTube. It's on my YouTube if you look through my playlists. August 11, 2017, we formed a coalition of Iranian nationalist parties, and I was one of the spokespersons for that, the spokesperson for it in the English language for an international audience. So point being, that's just a way of saying that I worked for a long time with the most nationalist elements in the Iranian society that you can imagine, not just outside the country. Inside the country, we were plotting a coup. This is what got me into trouble, by the way, Steph. What brought the intelligence agencies down on me was not so much, paranormal research or ufology, whatever exotic philosophical interests I have. It was the very tangible work that I was doing, helping people to plot a coup, a nationalist coup, inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I have to tell you, at one point, we had the support of 1/3 of the armed forces inside of Iran. And why that didn't succeed from 2017 to 2018 is a sad, long, tragic story. But in any case, the point is this, that I'm speaking from knowledge when I tell you that the most nationalist Iranians today want Israel to carpet bomb their country. They want Israel to come in and bomb all the key regime targets and all of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps barracks and all their key missile defense positions and so on and so forth. That is the horrible reality of the situation that we face today. And I say that as someone who for years, I wrote to the frickin' defense minister of Israel. And my letter, I know for a fact, wound up on his desk back in 2017 saying, number one, don't bomb Iran. Number two, please stop working with these separatist groups, these ethnic separatist groups, because this is not a way to cultivate goodwill among Iranian nationalists, right? So as someone who for years advocated against any kind of foreign military intervention in Iran, and by the way, I never want to see a single American soldier die in Iran. I think that is completely unnecessary, unjustified, okay, for any kind of ground invasion of Iran, and it won't be necessary. because mark my words, and that you're going to see this happen very soon. We're talking about imminent events here. Mark my words, when Israel bombs key targets inside Iran, the Iranian people will rise up and they will topple this crumbling regime. And they will ally themselves very clearly with Israel.
So the context would be then that because I know there was an Islamic revolution. Again, this is somebody who does not have much knowledge of this region at all. There was an Islamic revolution about the 80s, and there's a regime
79.
now in place.
79.
79, so heavily Islamic regime, very traditionalist regime, and and I do know that there is Iranian people who would say that they look at the pictures, and a lot of their parents would remember being free and going to college and wearing skirts and stuff, and they talk about this and they complain. It's like, we're now we want to get rid of this, we're imprisoned, and so they go against the regime. They claim the regime is sort of asserting like classic Muslim style, you're dhimmis and you do what we tell you type thing. And so you're suggesting that that's going to lead to the demos, the population are so against the regime that's going to lead to a flipping of the order.
It already has. There were 4 attempts to overthrow the Islamic Republic. Unfortunately, they all failed. The first one was in 1999, and then there was another one in 2000, and each time they gained strength. There was another one in 2009. Then there was the one that I was very involved with, which was 2017 into 2018. And when I say, 2017, 2018, they were burning mosques down, Steph. They were literally setting off incendiary devices in mosques. That was the level of vitriol from the population, not just toward the government, but toward Islam. 2017, 2018. And then the fourth of the attempted overthrows of the Islamic Republic was, what was it, basically last year, from 2022 to 2023, the round of nationwide protests that began with the killing of that woman, Mahsa Amini, for not wearing a hijab properly. That almost toppled the Islamic Republic. So this is a regime, hanging by its fingernails, and all it needs is the kick in the face off the cliff of an Israeli strike. And you're going to have basically the Iranian population reclaim their own heritage and reclaim their destiny.
So, and again, these are maybe off topic, maybe at some point, maybe redundant. So again, we don't have to completely dive down here. But I look then at the factions rising up in the West in relationship to this. So we'd look at maybe figures like Andrew Tate, and I don't mean him as a leader of a movement or something like this, but he's a very interesting litmus test of him swinging to becoming Muslim. You're seeing people like Sneeko and these characters, and you're seeing the presence of an awful lot more Islam in the West and the sort of rehabilitation of its image as, well, look, you've got feminism, you've got degeneracy, you've got people out there forming polycubes, Lev doing the hardcore report, and we're like, what is going on here? And then all of a sudden you have Fresh and Fit and whatever cast, and they're bringing on these girls and being like, I made 9 million by exploiting simps, and people are just throwing their hands up and being like, all right, bring in the jobs. Like, we want Islam. It's over. We need either hardcore Christian fundamentalists or we need something Islamic. And so people are like reverting back to religious extremism and this type of ordered forces. And you've noticed now this particular polarity has happened with the war in Gaza, where Israel and Zionism seems like it's lost a huge amount of political capital or social capital or something. And all of these characters have swung hugely against it. And they're like publicly complaining about it. And they're saying like, what the fuck is going on? And you're killing like all those kids in Gaza. And I'm starting to notice now, like, I think maybe Ireland's particular because Ireland doesn't have a good relationship with Israel. But nonetheless, it's like you're seeing it in normal people now. And like outside of Ireland, obviously, as well. Like I hear it off Americans. I hear it off lots of different people. And so is that like a sort of coalition that's forming, I guess, along the lines that you're saying, the traditionalist coalitions? It seems like Islam is rising up in England a little bit. Like, it's obviously not some super dominant force, but I do see it developing a presence. And then you're coming along and you're, are we sort of looking at it as like a technological, maybe like slightly atheist reaction against this, like aligned with Zionism? I look at like
the right thing to call it is Promethean. And look, if you read the work of Alexander Dugin, or just even listen to some of his statements, it's very clear that there's an overlap between Dugin's traditionalism and cultural relativist, postmodern, multicultural identity politics on the left. Dugin very much appeals to some of those leftist, we're the defenders of the downtrodden and oppressed, kind of people who are all supporting the Palestinian cause and so on and so forth, right? So it's this very disturbing conjunction of traditionalism together with leftist identity politics and the cause of the marginalized, downtrodden, and oppressed of the world and all this shit, which was the discourse of the Islamic revolution in Iran in 1979, right? And the Persian people have had enough of that. And let me say, let me be so bold as to say that tomorrow's Promethean Persia will not allow the West to fall into the hands of people like Andrew Tate. They will not allow it. Just the way you see Israel has had a lot of lobbying power and other kinds of power in the West, okay? Maybe to various very deleterious purposes in some instances, all right? But tomorrow, Persia will also have a lot of lobbying power in the West. And it will be completely aligned with the people who are promoting a Promethean renaissance of Western civilization. And it will be diametrically opposed to losing the West to Islam. No one can better educate Westerners as to how, frankly, an Aryan civilization is genocided culturally by Islam than the Persians can. Okay, the Persians will be able to very clearly educate Westerners as to what happened, because this is exactly what you're seeing happening in the West right now. This is exactly what happened in Iran from about, in those days, it took a few centuries. Today, things move much faster, but from about 800 to about 1200 in Iran, a similar thing went on, okay? And we understand the dynamics of that, and Persians can help Westerners not to fall prey to the same thing. But if push comes to shove, it's a war. And once Iran is free, Iran will not allow the West to be captured by Islam, no matter what it takes. No matter what it takes. And by the way, Iran is a nuclear power. Although I don't think that those weapons will be used in this confrontation, Iran is a nuclear power. It will be a stronger nuclear power in the future. And there will be all kinds of methods, I think, brought to bear by Persians as allies of a Promethean renaissance in the West to make sure that what happened to Iran in the Middle Ages does not wind up happening to the West. Because they cannot afford to lose the West either.
It's an interesting idea because I can see how a very large amount of things align there, because you have, of course, like the quintessential Aryan nation, which is Iran. It means Aryan. And then you have the connection to Nietzsche, of course. And I think there's a great argument for a Nietzschean future, like some type of ideological Nietzscheanism taking place. And I think that'll be a sort of broader coalition of German idealism coming in place, Nietzsche being one of the most prominent vessels for it. And then, of course, Prometheus aligns up with that stuff as well. And then if I'm looking at the other side, I obviously do see the way people are looking at the falling apart at the seams of Western culture and the social fabric around it. And they are demanding a consolidation of something that is traditional, that is life-giving, that's life-affirming, a weirdly Nietzschean term. But of course, tradition can provide those types of things. And I'm not I think Islam maybe in Europe might have a shout, but I see something more like Jordan Peterson's ideology in the Americas, certainly, if that was the case. And that's interesting because maybe we're talking decades in the future, but that seems like a large, spiritual war that seems like it's they're going to have to clash at some point.
Well, you know this as well as I do. Nietzsche foresaw this. He prophesied this in Ecce Homo. He talked about this great war that would come someday and that will be fought in his name. And that would be the war for not the war of one nation against another nation, but the war for the coming of the Ubermensch. He saw this as a prophet, and he was right. This is going to happen. It's beginning to unfold now. And the most life-affirming tradition is the tradition of Prometheus, who gave life to humanity. Okay, so the fire of life is what is burning in the torch of Prometheus, the fire of the furthest future. And Nietzsche knew that this day would come, and it's now unfolding before our eyes.
Well, there's one last question I have, and again, this could be very controversial, but it's related again to Zionism in Israel, because this is obviously where all the attention is at the moment. And going back to Nietzsche, what is it that Nietzsche says in The Genealogy of Morals? He says the quintessential fight is Rome versus Judea. Now we're framing this as, Prometheus versus maybe Islam or traditionalism or something like this. And again, I'm not saying that it has to be Nietzsche's framework, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So Nietzsche's like Rome versus Judea, and that began as a very physical fight where Rome destroys Judea. Christianity comes out of this, and Nietzsche's been saying that each iteration of this war has actually sophisticated and become more spiritual. It's become more abstract, to the point now where it's so abstract that it almost happens inside of you as a set of ideas that are fighting inside of each person. And that's like the mark of a great being, by the way, according to Nietzsche. So if we're going into this 21st century now, is that a relevant paradigm that Nietzsche's setting up? Because as we would see this, as a lot of people I'm looking at now, they're starting to like openly attack Ben Shapiro. Candace Owens is like having all these issues with him. And then a lot of people are coming and being like, wait a second now, lobbying in America, why is this influencing public opinion? And do you see that like Judea is losing its grip over the West or something like this? Or do you think that's too pragmatic version or interpretation of the metaphors? And like a lot of people then would look to Rome and say like the Rome is a return of Western European belief in itself and the Western European concept of order. And of course, like a lot of the right wingers are bending that towards fascism and stuff like this. And like how do you see all that collage clashing together and the way that you understand it?
Well, Steph, that aside from some of the more Arianist remarks that he makes in the Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche actually had a great deal of positive things to say about the Jews. Nietzsche was a fan of Israel and the Israelites. And a lot of the founding fathers of Zionism, modern Zionism, were Nietzscheans. They were people who read Nietzsche. Zionism is not some like Jewish religious phenomenon. It came from out of European intellectuals who on the one hand were reading Nietzsche and on the other hand were reading Marx. And, the early state of Israel, anyway, it's a long story, but okay.
It's actually a really good point. Like Herzl was like very secular. Like he sort of like saw Judaism was like, we're not going to be like religious parochial. Like it's almost like he was trying to make a Greek state in a weird way.
Yes.
It's weird.
Yes. People don't understand this about Israel and its foundations. And about who really controls, who holds power in Israel and who has their fingers on the various buttons, if you know what I mean, in Israel. So Nietzsche had very positive things to say about the Jews, the Israelites, Jews in a secular sense. I mean, he revered Spinoza. Spinoza was a huge influence on him. And so by no means was he an anti-Semite. Not only that, he railed against the anti-Semites of his time. So, I'm a Zionist in the Nietzschean sense. And I think that, when Nietzsche talks about the great aristocratic ethnicities of the world coming together and hybridizing to produce a hothouse for strange and choice plants, as he puts it, and that's going to be the milieu from out of which the Übermensch is born, he would definitely have included the Israelis in that. Whereas he would not have included masses of Muslims who want to embrace, some kind of Taliban, Daesh ideology, okay? Because he would have recognized the Promethean ethos that you see among, the Israelites, just as you see it in, various superior Western peoples and in, let's say, the Japanese and certainly in the Persians. Nietzsche was after that kind of international alliance of people with a cosmic visionary scope for the possibilities of the human future. And definitely the Israelis are on board with that and thinking in that direction. They want to go out into the stars with us. That's where they're oriented.
So this then comes to actually quite a nice crescendo. Because we're talking about the destiny and the future of the world, like the Weltanschauung, and that's basically what the war comes up against. And so you're seeing all of these forces, all of these mimetic forces currently rising up. And it is very fascinating because we've essentially seen the breakdown of the nation state in the last 100 years per se. And that's really difficult for people. This is really difficult for people because we obviously have affinity for our nation state, and it's the easiest form of identity. Like for me, Irish is like just such a simple identity for me, and it's a real one as well. And I want Ireland to do well. Like I really care about Ireland, but at the same time, like we're very international. It's so easy to travel. It's so easy to move around, and we're very influenced by memetics because of the globalized internet. Because of this thing, like the meme sphere is inside of all of our minds, and so we're not isolated anymore. Like Ireland was able to wage a very powerful nationalistic revolution because everybody in Ireland went to the pub, and that's where the memes were created with the traditional music and the speeches, and we were very insular, and we didn't really have outside influence that much. But that's not the reality we're in now. Now most people are like actually rising up in Ireland because they're watching the Americans and the French do the same. It's not actually happening in Ireland. It's like they're realizing, like, wait a second, this isn't normal, and they're rallying around this type of stuff for this type of reason. So when we talk about a spiritual war of the future, a cosmic kind of paradigm, there seems like this is rising up. Like there's choices and decisions to be made along the lines of what the future orientation of the world is. And I guess this is what you're trying to get ahead of here. You're trying to state, like, all right, the decisions, the nature of the decisions, the ideals that we choose for the future of the world is actually going to be the real fight. It happens first up here, and it will then trickle down into actual physical conflicts in various ways. But you have to make sure you get the top level of it right. And
exactly. Look, it's what the Germans called Weltanschauungskrieg. Weltanschauungskrieg. That's what we're engaged in here.
All right. Well, Lev, I know you want to do super chats and all that, but good stuff. Jason, good chatting as always.
It's great stuff. I have to keep taking the headphones off. What I would like to do, gentlemen, because I want to talk to you in such a way where my audio is going to sound better for the super chats themselves. I would want to make a quick pause, just do some advertising right now for the show and for additional Patreon episodes that we're going to have in the future while I refresh this screen that the two of you guys are on. If that's not going to work, it's fine. I'm going to save the super chats from this camera.
No. You do that, Lev. It works for me. I'm just going to go and come back in a minute, okay? While you do those advertisements.
All right, everybody. I have switched.
Lev, we can't hear you. You're muted.
I hear you.
I know.
Lev, Boomer Lev, what is going on? Lev. We can't hear you. You're muted.
You are not going to hear me anymore because I'm switching mics, but the audience, the people, are going to hear me.
Okay.
So I am going to try to switch to make this thing work. If not, I'm going to do the super chats from here. It's fine either way.
I'll be right back. All right.
All right, everybody, I have heroically switched back to this mic right now. We are going to resume with answering all the super chats soon, but I have to refresh this thing, unfortunately, so here we go. And by the way, while I'm refreshing and figuring this thing out, I just want to let everybody know that if you want to support Break the Rules, we are going to have a lot more of these Patreon Q&A episodes live in New York City. So that is going to keep happening. It happened recently with Gnostic Informant and Jason Jorjani, and it's going to happen again like in a couple of months when Jason comes back from New York City. As far as the kind of topics, being patrons, you guys will have an opportunity to let me and Jason and the other guests know like what exactly you want us to talk about. So as far as this technological hurdle here, not sure what to tell you. Boomer Lev is going to take a pause. I'm not even going to talk right now. I am going to take a pause and figure this thing out. Because looking at the audio, at the mic, absolutely nothing is coming on here. Let me try again. Let me try again over here. All right, I think my audio should be working for this. I'll keep the webcam here, which is fine. Yes, Jason, I can hear you. We are going to be back just in a few minutes, and Steph is going to return as well. So just give me a second, but I am right here. Okay, so unfortunately my attempt was not successful, but we are going to do it like this. I'm going to say the super chats right now. So here we go. Jason, you can hear me right now, right?
I can. How's my audio?
Your audio is
good, and my audio is not going to echo anymore, so it should be good. So here we go, everybody. Here are the super chats. We are going to start from M. Bulmari, who donated $10. Doctor, what are your thoughts on the subject of exorcism? Demonic possession seems common to many cultures, but Catholic Church seems most formalized. What are demons? Why do they respond to Latin?
Okay, look, I'm going to assert my dictatorial powers here to focus all questions at least remotely and toward the Colossus project or Prometheus or such, related topics. Okay, I'm not going to get into exorcism and demonology and any of these matters in the present context. Okay, let's do a relatively coherent and cohesive program that at least in some way bears upon this Prometheus Colossus project.
Fair enough. I'm going to continue with the rest of the super chats over here. So we have King of Biltong. Now, this is an advertisement for the show. This is a very special sponsor. So I just want to say good afternoon from Anton's Meat and Eat. Get your biltong delivered to your door at no charge using BTR at checkout. Biltong is a great high-protein snack in between meals. So, Jason, I told you before about Land of Biltong, and you can find it by going to, let's see, there's a couple of different ones, but Land of Biltong. If you go to landofbiltong.com, buy some biltong, put in BTR in the code for free shipping. So I highly recommend it. I'm definitely going to have to give some of the biltong to you when you come back here to New York soon. So anyway, with that being said, let's go to my main man and yours, Gnostic Informant. $10. Here late will have to rewatch. But the image of Prometheus in the midst of a Christian nation is exactly what makes the image even more legit. He stands in opposition to Zeus' decree, kills fatalism. Any thoughts?
America is not a Christian nation. And anyone who says that America is a Christian nation, quote unquote, doesn't understand the country that they're living in. You go tell me what is it about America's unique cultural creations in any sphere, from literature and the arts to film, okay, what is uniquely American that is somehow essentially Christian in character? You won't find it, okay? America has, from the beginning, from the moment that it developed a distinct historical identity, America has actually expressed the Promethean archetype probably more than any other nation in human history. So I reject the premise of our dear friend's question, which is that, America is a Christian nation and this is some kind of a colossus being erected in that context. No, this is a colossus being erected to embody the defining spirit of this country, even more so than the Statue of Liberty.
Our next super chat is from our good friend Chester, who says, "Thank you, Professor Jorjani and Uberboyo."
You're welcome.
Thank you, Justin. As always.
And our next one over here is from Pixie, which is $50. Pixie, thank you so much. That is amazing. And Pixie says, "Fantastic idea and great discussion as always. Thank you." And finally, over here we have El Chasseur, $10. Can Jorjani explain what he means by the end of Leviathan when he writes, "Among politicians of our nihilistic age, so far only Hitler has succeeded in becoming sacred, but someone else is coming"?
Well, that's in the context of a discussion of Giorgio Agamben and Max Weber, and I think to an extent Carl Schmitt. But the basic idea is this, that in politics, when you make something or someone unspeakable and they're banished, right, to the extent where their manifestation is a terrifying specter, then you've effectively succeeded in allowing that thing, in affording that thing the possibility to transcend the sphere of the merely political and to become religious in nature. You have sacralized the object of the ban. There's a whole discussion. That passage belongs in a very specific context in Iranian Leviathan, where I'm discussing the symbolism of the werewolf in medieval politics, medieval European politics, the werewolf as a symbol of the leader who has been banned or ostracized, and in that way becomes a terrifying sacred force that comes back at the realm of civilized life from out of the wilderness of the dark forest. Very much in the way in which, toward the end of Game of Thrones, Robert Stark disappears into the wilderness of the North and becomes the occulted king, right? So what I'm saying is that, you know, when you ostracize something to the point where its name evokes holy terror, you have actually elevated that thing or that person to a position not of mere political power, but of godlike power. And look, no one can deny that the statement I'm making there is factually accurate with regard to the leader of the Third Reich.
There is also the thing that Neil wrote right now, talking about his super chat being for Steph about Christianity. So I can repeat it if you want, Steph.
Yes. So first, I'd like to ask Jason something. And again, Jason, not obliged to talk about this because obviously, like, you know, absolute landmine, get everybody in trouble. But what is the, like, you're looking at Prometheus, and we've already mentioned this with the Nazis, and they create, like, they have Arno Becker, they create V2 rockets. Werner von Braun is the leader of NASA. You're having them, like, you know, testosterone and anabolic steroids come out of the Germans in between the war. They create Blitzkrieg, which is like the foundation of the American Army's model of fighting. They are in some sense radically progressive. And you've said before that you saw them as radically traditionalist. And like I would look at all the stuff that was going on there as them actually pushing forward in many senses. Although I completely understand the callback to tradition and the authoritarianism that was inherent within this, and people like Spengler coming in contact with Hitler and being like, "This guy's a fucking idiot. Like, why are we letting him run the show?" But obviously, like, whatever, maybe you could say the Germans as a whole, they had this enormous futurism. Like Spengler would call this the Faustian spirit, you know? And why exactly wouldn't that be the leading charge? And why would that symbol not be the leading one? And why defaulting to Prometheus? And what do you do also about the association with that as well? Now, I think you've addressed, by the way, Faust versus Prometheus, but I was just wondering.
Yeah, well, to recap Faust versus Prometheus, I mean, this is not doing I have written about this at, and discussed it at greater length in other contexts, but to recap that very briefly, there are aspects of the Promethean myth and of the ethos which it enshrines that are far more promising, humanistic, liberating, beneficent than the Faust myth. I mean, Faust is literally a myth about an alchemist who strikes a deal with the devil. All right. First of all, the context is radically Christian. Faust doesn't make sense outside of a Christian context. And I think Spengler was saying this when he defined Western civilization as Faustian, because remember, Spengler's conception of the West is that it's a civilization that begins in the Middle Ages, and that classical civilization was a separate civilization, a distinct world that had already died, which from my perspective makes nonsense out of the Renaissance. I mean, the Renaissance is a renaissance, a rebirth of Western civilization, which began in classical Greece. So I think Spengler gets that wrong. And I think he gets its defining figure wrong, because sure, if you're going to say the West began with medieval Europe, then the West is radically Christian, in the context of which an aspiration toward, cosmic horizon of techno-scientific development is going to be striking a deal with the devil as some crazy lone alchemist in a tower or a dungeon somewhere, right? It's a very individualistic, antisocial image of progress. And it's one that's inherently demonized within what is by default accepted as a Christian world. Whereas I would say the West begins with Greece, and specifically, the West doesn't begin with Homer's Greece. The West doesn't begin with the Achaeans. It doesn't begin with the Mycenaeans. That's not the Western world yet. That's some antique Near Eastern culture still, whose sculptures are all modeled on ancient Egyptian or Babylonian art. The West begins precisely at the time of Aeschylus, when Prometheus steps forward as the first great figure of Greek tragedy. And within a century of that, you get all these philosophers and proto-scientists. So in that sense, Prometheus is a much more adequate symbol for the defining character of Western civilization than Faust. And Prometheus, as the creator and benefactor of humanity, is looking out for the welfare of a whole society. He's not just some madman, in a laboratory somewhere. Although, in Shelley's work, Frankenstein becomes the modern Prometheus, right? So there is definitely connection between the Promethean and
the big echo.
This could. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Seth.
There's just a big echo.
All right, so this could be maybe going a little bit too deep down the rabbit hole here. Okay.
But there is an echo through your side. Okay, good. All right. Look, but you were asking about the Nazis. I'm not one of these to sidestep questions about the Nazis, right? No, they were not entirely traditionalist, by no means. And if you read my essay, Black Sunrise, in my book, Lovers of Sophia, which is an anthology of essays, and then also if you look at, there's a whole chapter in my book, Closer Encounters, which is nominally a book about ufology, a philosophical analysis of the UFO phenomenon, but there's a whole chapter called The Nordic Breakaway Civilization, where I revisit my analysis of the Third Reich that I had initially developed in Black Sunrise, in the essay Black Sunrise. And I clearly point out that there was a very severe tension of polarities within the Reich, between traditionalists on the one hand, and Hitler more gravitated in some ways toward that camp, between traditionalists on the one hand and futurists on the other hand. But remember that, the certain people within the Reich, particularly within the SS, which was managing all the techno-scientific and industrial development of the country, they were closely allied with the futurists in Italy, right? I mean, Benito Mussolini and F.T. Marinetti were close collaborators in the early years. And then later, you also had people like Marconi working directly with the SS on certain projects, including in third countries like Czechoslovakia, where the Italians and the Germans were working together on very sophisticated technological projects. So yeah, there was a very futurist, innovative, frankly, Promethean side to the Reich. And there was always this ideological battle and tension within the regime between those two polarities. So this is one of the reasons why I've always said that when people accuse people from the left, accuse us of being fascist or whatever. I mean, this is a very superficial and it's a very superficial and ignorant epithet that they attempt to label us with, because there is no such thing as a coherent fascism. Look, Giovanni Gentile and whatever his specific theory was, that's one thing. But as a large-scale socio-political phenomenon, fascism was radically incoherent. There were people like Evola, on the one hand, who are identified as fascists, although he wrote against fascism from the side of traditionalism. But there's people, in the polarity of Evola who are fascists that are completely embracing regressive tradition and are of a kind of Olympian cast of mind. And then there are people branded as fascists like Marinetti, who are, in a way, a little too Promethean even for my taste. I mean, Marinetti wanted to go into the Uffizi Museum and smash all the classical sculptures because their greatness was holding Italy back from innovating. Talk about, someone who's gone off the accelerationist deep end.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I guess actually I'd like to catch on what you said on the start of that. And the Italian futurists, by the way, are fascinating as well. There's two things I like to say. So the first one would be Fen de Villers. Have you come across him? He's a sculptor who's he's very interesting. So he kind of popped up about 2-3 years ago, and I saw him about 2-3 years ago, and he's a classic sculptor, and he's obviously lamenting. He's like, look, all these people are saying art is dead, sculptors are statues are all crap, and he comes along and he says, yes, I get it, but the thing is that we don't have an artistic tradition, so we can't go and try to make classical paintings where we look all beautiful and powerful and all this, because that's called pastiche. That's it's kitsch, it's fake, it's not how art works. We can't strip something like that and just sellotape it to the wall. In fact, what we have that a lot of people don't understand is that we have a modernist tradition that was very, very authentic and close to us. It's a post-industrial tradition that was vital and powerful, that burst up at the start of the 20th century. And like, for example, James Joyce was basically the quintessential modernist. The Italian futurists were hugely involved in that movement. Ezra Pound, like patron Joyce, for example. So all of this stuff was wrapped up together in modernism. And Fen is discussing how that spirit is actually going to be the art trend of the future. If we could take that spirit and then try to perfect it in like a couple of generations, we might have something that's absolutely exceptional. So he's a modernist Italian futurist sculptor, and he makes very interesting styles. So like, look, if you're going for a building project, he might be somebody definitely worth having a chat with or having a look at, because he's a very interesting man.
Well, there are interesting hybridizations of modernism with classicism, like, for example, in the Art Deco era.
So he's big into Art Deco, big into it.
Yeah, so like if you look at Rockefeller Center, not the Prometheus sculpture, but if you look at the sculpture of Atlas at Rockefeller Center, I think it's by Lee Laurie. This is a great example of a kind of modernist classicism, high Art Deco, where you can see as part of the aesthetic heritage of that sculpture, the Industrial Revolution. It's kind of embedded in that. And so there's interesting things that can be done in that regard. And then we've also had interesting conversations. I don't want to get too much into this, but kind of private conversations we've had as part of this project in terms of exotic ideas that could bring a kind of futurist tech savvy dimension to what is essentially a classical sculpture. And that has to do with things like chemical engineering and what kind of material the sculpture could potentially be surfaced with, a kind of new material that it could be surfaced with, which could play with light in very interesting ways in San Francisco Bay. And it could also make the sculpture of its own era, of this time and of this epoch, while at the same time channeling classical forms and reaffirming that heritage.
Yes, absolutely. I think Fen has really been a great voice asserting this, and it came actually at a very interesting time, because again, the typical reaction was the yearning back for a grand classical tradition, and Fen is coming in as a realist and saying, guys, we just don't have that. It's maybe in the musical equivalent, it's like people saying, I want a symphony orchestra. It's like, I want Beethoven Part 2. It's like, guys, We can't do that. You can't. Beethoven, if he showed up now, he'd maybe be making techno or something like that, and you wouldn't understand because you're expecting the wrong thing. It's all about timeliness, it's about understanding where you are. And so he's pointing to modernism as this very powerful thing that we could latch onto. But I'll leave that.
I hear you, and I also think, Steph, that we should have a private side conversation about this, Ross and you and I. This would be an interesting subject to discuss amongst ourselves as well.
100%. I'd actually love to hash that out because it's a very fascinating one. The other one I was going to ask, and it's more just to get you to extend. We're talking about Spengler. Spengler says Apollonian civilization moves into Faustian, and you're asserting something that I would understand as Nietzsche's birth of tragedy concept, which is, we essentially have the first event in culture, is what Nietzsche says, which comes with Aeschylus and the arrival of Sophocles and the creation of tragedy. And you have the tragic arts. And before that, the famous idea in Birth of Tragedy, you have Apollonian separated statues. You have the Dionysian satyr festivals where they're all going to like a Woodstock concert. And then there's this synthesis moment. And it becomes this explosion of a spirit. A spirit is born. And even Ian McGilchrist would speak about this, like all of a sudden the statues start to develop a individualism. They start to develop a personality, as opposed to the Kairos statues that look sort of autistic and left hemisphere, as Ian McGilchrist used, the very left hemisphere, the Kairos statues. And then, of course, they lose that feature and develop a richness to them and a more of a form. And then all the plays develop the chorus, develop the sort of essentially the proto version of cinema. That kind of shows up at this point. So you see that as the eruption of the super spirit of Western man, which is in some sense the actual spirit that carries mankind as a whole forward. And that is like the first burst of this. And then Socrates comes along and it dips down. And then it bursts back up in Rome.
And I wrote about this in Prometheus and Atlas. And I want to just summarize that really briefly. But before I do that, let me just, because you brought up the birth of tragedy, folks, Uberboyo wrote a fantastic foreword to a new translation of the birth of tragedy by Konstantin von Hofmeister. I think it's Legend Books. Konstantin von Hofmeister's translation, fantastic foreword by Uberboyo. I think it's going to become the definitive edition of The Birth of Tragedy. So that's something to look at, folks. But apropos of what you were saying, in Prometheus and Atlas, my first book, I wrote about how the reason perspective arises. People talk about perspective in painting and how it arose in the Renaissance period and so on and so forth. But there's a perspective in sculpture which allows sculpture to become more representational and for the individual characteristics of the human person to be accurately represented. And I think that the arising of perspectival awareness among the classical Greeks had everything to do with the setup of the theater and the perspective that different audience members had on the drama. So this is the first time that people are getting out from a human situation and looking down on it, and they're literally looking down on it on different nights from different perspectives in the amphitheater. So it caused a psychical revolution in the mind of the Greeks that allowed them to perceive human life in a different way. It's not incidental that, again, the first figure of Greek drama was Prometheus in the trilogy written by Aeschylus.
And that's mad. Again, I'm not sure if you've got that idea in any way related to Ian McGilchrist, but he would also speak about this as, so like the way the hemispheres split inside of our brain is that our left hemisphere very frigid and actually very two-dimensional. And the right hemisphere is the one that has this capacity for perspective. And you could literally see this in schizophrenics when their right hemisphere is damaged. They can't draw three-dimensionals, but they are able to draw two-dimensionals. So they almost become like...
You're forward to the birth of tragedy.
Yes. And you're speaking about this now with the Greeks. So I actually didn't know that, but I did realize it with the statues, and I got that from Ian. He's talking about the Kairos. Now, of course, what was the defining feature of the Renaissance? What does everybody celebrate with the Renaissance? It's like, well, they went from these medieval cartoons, essentially, and they evolved into perspective painting. That was the big thing. It's like, oh my God, these guys are putting depth of field into a painting. There's 4 layers in this painting. It's not just, an icon that's sitting on top of like a flat surface. There's perspective. And Ian believes that what's literally happening there is like another part of our consciousness is switching on and becoming domineering. And it's the more powerful artistic right hemisphere in many senses. And so that might be happening. And this is a very interesting idea of history, because I get this theory of history, but I don't think actually it's that well articulated or spoke. But it's almost like mankind. This is very Nietzschean. Mankind is this collective with our parochial habits that just kind of stumble and roll forward. And this weird synthesis of forces arrives in Greece that leads to this almost like a cloud or a dream or this moment where all this culture shows up that is, it was a step forward from parochial man. Like, it's beyond man. It's a vision of perspective, beautiful bodies, idealism, and great art, culture, theater.
And by the way, also science. It's completely integral to the rise of science that the Greeks discovered perspective in their art. They are two aspects of the same phenomenon. Remember, Prometheus isn't just the deity of technological science. Prometheus, teacher in every art, brought the fire. Brought the fire that proved to mortals a means to mighty ends. That's what Aeschylus says. Prometheus, teacher in every art. In other words, the artistic revolution that took place in Greece, where you're starting to see perspective embodied in Greek sculpture and the realism of Greek sculpture, is part and parcel of the discovery of the scientific view of the world. Because see, what's happening is traditional man, which whether he was Greek or Babylonian or Egyptian or whatever, was completely stuck almost like one-dimensionally in a particular cultural world, in the customary view of the world that, was ingrained subconsciously in a person inculcated by that culture from birth. And so they had no perspective. They're quite literally lacking in perspective. Greece at the time of Aeschylus was a nexus for the clash of a bunch of different cultural worlds. You had the clash between the Greek world and the Egyptian world that you start to see. For example, in the pre-Socratics and the dialogues of Plato, all these exchanges and tensions between Greek and Egyptian culture, which mostly were taking place on the horizon of sea trade across the Mediterranean. But then you also had the huge culture clash between the Persians and the Greeks. And so what happened with these Greeks who were stuck, they were kind of hillbillies actually at that time. They were in this backwater of the ancient world. They were not one of the sophisticated cultures of the ancient world, like the Babylonians or the Egyptians. And they were in this backwater. And what happened in the minds of these hillbillies was that they said, shit, these cultures all have different perspectives. And our customary way of looking at the world is also just a perspective. And there must be a way of understanding the world beyond any particular cultural perspective. Well, we call that physis. That's nature. They discovered nature. Okay, so Prometheus on the stage, the dramatic persona created by Aeschylus, epitomizes this revolution that took place in the Greek psyche, and then that becomes the wellspring of the whole of Western civilization, a revolution both in aesthetics, but also one that signifies the birth of technological science. Techne, that's what it is, the revolution of craft.
And this is like very, very true and like so fascinating, because the mimetic consistency then with the arrival of the Renaissance is quite astounding, because you get artistic perspectivism. And like, again, Ian McGilchrist reads into this neuroscience, which is a really interesting take. But then, of course, there is also, in a very pragmatic sense, what all of a sudden happens is the Italians are having a flood in of this entire paradigm shifting world perspective of the ancient world, clashing up against their perspective of Christianity. And this is just, that's, schizo forces that are just pulling people's brains apart. And all of a sudden then they are forced to just revolutionize their thought and develop the capacity to flip into different perspectives. That's good training for the mind. It's a very, very healthy thing. It's Nietzschean perspectivism is forced upon them. And this leads to the humanism, which evolves into essentially the modern spirit, as we understand it 500 years ago. And it's essentially a miracle, like Nietzsche calls it one of those high points where from the slumber that was laid atop of Rome, you see Rome be reborn again, classical world be reborn again. So that's like an interesting sort of cycle of history where we have this potential to burst into this high cultural point where there's the vivid capacity to see reality and break through paradigms and think scientifically, I guess you could say, that comes along with an artistic revolution as well, which also eviscerates all the false dichotomies that you see get set up nowadays with like religion versus art and religion versus science and science versus art, because all of those things are just silly. It's like, no, that's just bad science and bad religion fighting against each other. We're talking here that like when the mind is right, when the philosophy is right, when everything clicks together, all of these things erupt out of the same fountain, which is the spirit, and they all work together, and you have a sort of a culture of the future.
Couldn't agree more. Exactly right.
Yeah, it's really cool perspective. Really cool perspective. Lev.
So, guys, we have a couple of more super chats coming in here,
Yeah.
and one of them is right over here from Becky. No, before Becky Knight, we have Wulo Life, $10. Jason's thought on the unknown creator of Bitcoin and the future of finance, crypto in the Promethean future.
About Satoshi, I have no public remarks. About the future of Bitcoin and crypto, man, we could do a whole show on that. Let me just say this much. I mentioned earlier that, look, it's the key to wrecking the Chinese economy and to freeing ourselves from this planned central bank digital currency and associated social credit surveillance system that they want to put us in, right? I mean, clearly, blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are the key for a Promethean revolt against that totalitarian system that the global banking elites and the Chinese paternalists want to put into place. But more specifically, let me just remind people that the executive director of this project, Ross Calvin, specializes in blockchain and crypto technology. And our other partner, other fellow member of the board, Dario Mutabgia, is also now specializing in blockchain and crypto technology. And look, you really don't need to focus too hard on reading between the lines if you've encountered my writings on blockchain and crypto in my book Promethean Pirate, or in my novella Artemis Unveiled, where I lay out, blockchain and crypto as key to the creation of a Promethean network state in the future, right? I mean, this is a vision that I've elaborated on both in Promethean Pirate and in Artemis Unveiled. It doesn't take a genius to look at who my partners are and to imagine that perhaps there are other projects that we're working on as well that are less public and less bombastically obvious than this Colossus, and that have to do with blockchain and crypto technology.
And the last super chat of the day over here I see is from Maria Irbis. So she's talking about redemption through sin, which is this video book that Robert Sefer made. And she's asking what you think about that. Now, I'm not sure that ties in directly to what we're discussing here. The only way that I could make it tie in, though, the only way is with the question that I asked earlier: who are the forces that are going to be opposing this statue being built? Would they just be like this ragtag team of leftist activists, or is it something more organized?
Well, I have no comment on the question because of the terms in which it was phrased. But what I will say is that this idea of redemption through sin is something that you see in The Birth of Tragedy, when Nietzsche is talking about the Aryan spirit in a particular passage of The Birth of Tragedy where he brings up Prometheus. And he talks about the idea of active sin. And he compares the myth of the transgression in Eden, of eating from the fruit of knowledge, to the theft of the fire of the forge from Olympus by Prometheus, right? And so there is a sense in which, when viewed from a Christian perspective, the Prometheus myth is a kind of active sin that's redemptive in the heroic power that it allows humanity to reclaim. But the whole notion of sin, which Nietzsche deconstructed at length in The Genealogy of Morals, is inherently problematic. And one of the reasons why I reached back to Prometheus from the beginning of my philosophical project was to find a basis for the revitalization of Western civilization that antedated the convoluted development of notions such as sin and other associated Christian concepts.
There is also one final super chat here from Becky, who's been trying her hardest to get this out. So her question, what about the Hebrew idioms, parables, and parabolic pantomimes in the Old and New Testament? Again, I'm not sure if that has anything to do with what we're talking about here, but she was really, really persistent in wanting to at least ask this. So
I don't know
What about them?
she's on about.
I don't know either. I tried my best here with Becky. She's been saying about these super chat for a while now, but Becky, here you go. I asked your question, and now we can move on.
Becky, we don't mean to be rude, but not sure we understand the question.
Yes.
All right. So, guys, I want to thank you guys for being here. If there are any final comments about the Colossus statue and what we can expect from this project going forward, people are going to go to the website. I'm going to post the website here in the chat, and it's also in the description for all you guys. But is there anything, Jason, that you would want people to be ready to experience in the next, let's say, couple of months going forward?
Sure. So as I said, we are going to be launching this NFT project. We see it as a kind of alchemical transformation of something nihilistic and frankly trashy into something that is embedded with deep meaning and that can serve as an initiatic process. But of course, it's also a fundraising mechanism. And we intend to offer, NFTs to early funders of the project. And we already have funding links embedded in the website. So if you go to AmericanColossus.org, toward the end, you'll see multiple ways as an individual donor to contribute to the project. And I urge you to do so. It's really becoming part of what will be looked back on as a historic endeavor. You really are contributing to something that I think is going to change the course of history and save our civilization in the 11th hour.
And Steph, any final thoughts about this project and also what the great Uberboyo is working on now?
I like the audacity, and I remember it's always nice to come across people who are going to put the money where the mouth is and actually try to make it happen. So like Jason obviously has been talking about these ideas for a while, and he's pushing towards physical manifestation of this, and so it's good. It's good to see this stuff get pushed forward. And I'm around a lot of circles that spend a lot of time lamenting and a lot of time sort of being like, oh God, things are so bad, and the death of culture, and where are all our statues going, and no one's making classical music anymore, and cinema's all crap. And to actually speak to people about the realistic difficulty of like making something like a film, like, do you understand that if you want to make a film, you can't just want to make a film? You go up and you say to a Hollywood executive, it's like, all right, I'd like to make a film. It's like, what? Great guy. Do you have any idea how a film is made? A producer has to go and find 20 millionaires and say to them, here, give us 2 million each. And then you get 40 million and you give it some guy, and he has to spend that and then give the producer back 50 million so that the producer doesn't get his pants pulled down and absolutely ruined and his career destroyed forever. So the reason why things like this aren't made is because, you don't sit down and you don't form projects and say to somebody practical, like, here's an actual plan that we're going to try to make. And you can even go and form that plan and send it to somebody. And if they're like, all right, it's about 60% the way there, but it still needs a bit of work. And you come back eventually and the plan is in place. And then people are like, we're going to put money on this thing and we're going to make it happen. And that's how things like films are made. That's how these huge projects tend to happen. And, yeah, there's always a lack of thinking about this stuff. People think these things just float out of the air, And so with something like this, it's pushing forward. It's audacious. It's, huge in its scope. And it's about saying like, well, let's put it out there and see how far we can force it through. So I like that. I like the thinking going into it, and Ross is highly competent as well. So I'd look forward to seeing what's going on that front. And with myself, I think obviously the Birth of Tragedy forward, I'm going to make a video on it as well. And I'll be chatting to Constantine too. Constantine translated. So I'd recommend everybody who's interested in some of these ideas, especially like we were talking about at the end, like buying a book, Birth of Tragedy, giving it a read. I think it's always a joy to get into as well. And we'll have some subsequent reading material. This would be an example of something that you see out of The Birth of Tragedy. What is Nietzsche's project? Why is the Birth of Tragedy so critical to Nietzsche's project? Because Nietzsche was growing up around Wagner, and he was seeing the rise of a artistic spirit. And it's actually kind of similar to our situation, where he was sort of saying, how do I guide this artistic spirit so it fulfills its potential? Almost like he's a father trying to help something give birth, or a midwife trying to help something give birth. And you see the same thing with like a philosopher like Jason, trying to make sure that culture is born in the right way. And he's trying to push it in a direction that he wants it to go. And so it's idealistic and it's connected to this tradition. And Nietzsche saw himself as trying to do something similar. The classical ideal, manifest in our age. So it maybe is one of the foundational texts for what these guys are up to doing here. So that is I guess that's the shilling that I'll be doing today.
Let me add.
Thank you, Lev, by the way.
Let me add one last thing, Lev. And by the way, thank you for that, Steph. Let me add one last thing, which is that, and I'm glad I waited until now, to say this. We have a Prometheusm Telegram chat. And frankly, I have tried to keep it not exactly private, but low key for a long time because, we don't want trolls in there. We want serious people who are interested in discussing serious ideas. And so hopefully the people who are most motivated to listen to this all the way through to the end are the ones who we're extending this invitation to. There is a link in the description of this show that will give you access to the Prometheusm chat on Telegram. And it is the most direct way to be in communication with me. It's the place on social media where I spend the most time. So anyone who's interested in joining that and who's on Telegram or who wants to get onto Telegram to be part of it, there is a link to the Prometheusm chat in the description and the show notes for this program. Thank you again, Lev, and thank you, Steph.
Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you very much, Steph. And I also posted those links in the chat as well. I just posted the Telegram in the chat, and also be sure to go to AmericanColossus.com. That's in the chat as well in the description.
.org. AmericanColossus.org.
AmericanColossus.org. Yes, .org. Be sure to go there. And like I said before, landofbiltong.com. Become a consumer of some of the best meat when it comes to protein working out, and it's really tasty as well. And they're a good company from South Africa. This guy highly recommend. BTR is the code that you put in there for free shipping. Taste it. Let me know what you think about it. And be sure to follow these two wonderful people, Steph, Jason. I look forward to getting you on in New York, Steph. When are you coming over?
I'll come. Well, I'll be there. Maybe.
All right, you better. Okay. Well, guys, thank you so much for the stream.
Make sure to coordinate it so that I'm there at the same time and not here in LA, because I can't miss the opportunity to hang out with you.
Yes,
we go to the museum.
That's the only way we're going to be doing this.
We go to the museum.
And once again, be sure to subscribe. Hit the bell. Very important. Put a comment in the video, share it with all your friends. And lastly, but not leastly, patreon.com/breaktherules. Listen, we had some tech problems today with my microphone and my cam. Doesn't matter, because the most important thing is that we got Jason and Steph here. Full, high quality, wonderful audio, so you guys are able to hear them. But if you want to make sure that at least the super chats are going to be well said, I got to upgrade this, and the only way to upgrade these systems is with your monetary support. So patreon.com/break. See, this is how we turn lemons into lemonade. I'm excusing this problem that Brave Browser has and just saying, well, this is just because I have a bad computer. I do have a bad computer, I swear. And I can have a much better computer if you guys send money right now. Patreon.com/breaktherules. I'm going to put it into a poll over here as well. Who is not a patron yet? Here's the link, so all you guys see it. It's gonna be a poll that's gonna last like 10 seconds as this thing is closing, but you guys better go to patreon.com/breaktherules right now, become a patron. The Q&A that we had, Jason, that was an amazing experience. We got to have a very intimate Q&A with the BTR patrons, and we went deep on Stanley Kubrick, on Prometheus, on Atlantis, on all of this wonderful stuff. So you guys are going to be a part of it too, because when you're going to be physically in New York City, the patrons, I invite them to a special $20 patron events, exclusive events, where you guys can actually meet me and the wonderful people that I bring on BTR. You're going to be invited to live events that happen in the studio itself in New York City. So we're going to be having a lot more of that happening as well. So yeah, become part of what all of this is. Jason, Steph, Gnostic Informant, myself, all these great, incredibly smart people, myself excluded here. But you know what I'm talking about. This is the real revolution right now that's happening, and we can't do it without your support. So we really appreciate you supporting Break the Rules, supporting these two wonderful people over here. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Mwah. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.